Yachia we are say Adeshima Premo ato apa sima du haya Kessben FM Kessben television suni yabasum bio sade agudie ma konfona sorry a free prem tobre ekosi no mienu yeboabo man nsem ano na yede fa fidi kasie suni yede di mu ntoa ewo miamia hodo amwo na ene dwumadie no a divert kakra nanso news yede bremu ene say oman photo samfo yasana hene nyewe oman sikasem so Finance Minister Yebran Munyamfo Ken Oforiata Omrashaba Jafie Parliament House sia menemo kasai na enye ade wu bia mo mani tua se aban boy akohoma wia e become say a supplementary budget papa yi Omrashaba Jafie a yenhwe COVID-19 efri March eba besi sabra be wura osana August busumi mu oman Ghana sikasem te sen ede be asronko na papa yi okoka kire yen ye da fie be na wotwemienu kwa no me ensaso no Omani sika sama apeja kosoro abafem COVID-19 fan sika edi tumu no ade aba ne ade ayo omani ye kɔ anase ye ba ye gina tentene ana ye butubutu ho ye bra no nyamfo kanofori atai na dama omani sika sam de obi anim de ensen no giso no a ene nim ba bia obefa sika sam no ba bi ode koro ene ba bia wakoduro ye hwe nanim enche ye be kɔ Parliament House live na ensem a ekoso no yakotie bia di ho adanse ne awia wonoma enim de omobo wa kɔ eye economy wo mu wanti hitin Ghana sikasem pande sanka se wo kasa kire o madwen efa sikasem ho no ye be frɛ wo no mo na nsem papa yi kan wo mo so abore tofa wo ma kirekirim apapa mu amyehu ba bia ye de o ma sikasem ekoro premo atopa wosima dumienu your man in the afternoon minimi nuanom the whole news team no nyina na yasi enkonwa medini Ali Baba Dan Kambari se akonya damu a yenko Parliament House we na yenko se ewura no nyamfo Keno Furiata wa kradwa we ready supplementary budget no ache Ghana de shiana na come say we are seeing so hwe www.kessbenfm.com so mo Antwerp Belgium mo fanto da so radio mbeti enka mo London Winners Radio any Amansan FM Germany Cologne Sunshine Radio and London so your world radio station bia fen wo yi ni tiaba enche ye ba odo no akire mo na your information centers bi etese kunadu yadon park na so me nua Master Gaspar wabodem one big guys ni na hwede yekoso fadiga ene kwakudua no omomfe ni agrokra ye so ye toto no mase ye boye mu asemam se igbe nyame nhira mo na onye mu akasefo ena Master P Ventures so ewo don keke ya Card Prominent Enterprise ewo du nko no fin just adjacent GN Bank no ena El Shaddai Information Center baako ewo kejeji baako wo konongo odumase kwa me dada de no ena kejeji na nkasa so ye wo fa asemche information center won mo doso pa yenya bre na se owura no nyamfo adumra hye baja fie no wa sha ase kenkan borofo no a ye kotie bia nsana ya ka chie de ato aso ba.
This is 93.3 all the radio stations and other radio stations listen to. Breaking news.
Arismama ye bompa ye se ye benya feed no live every Parliament House na ensem a ye wura munyamfo Ken Oforiata ede betu dwafa ye supplementary budget ho no ye de ho abobo na yenka mo se anyuma ye kuo bi te se Currency Ventures say what is Zahara man capsules abadwa so ti bema obeso ye bema mu na sabio we ri intinanum enkyere wo esan se watopa ho nsensemaye bisi basanti mesrewo ema oba no mfa wafuru ena ne atumpa na omunum se taw Davida wabra wasumu ho joba ene se obeto Zahara man capsules na wanom mienu anopa mienu anwumre eno ano no wo de fa hye ho nanom me se enti no emu asisi a ekwa bedam moja no bedi afrosa ne ye na fa renchen na okosi ne mu atim se yes wo ye beba mu eno na me kan fa ma wo Zahara man capsules mienu anopa mienu anwumre afa namu yade infections anase ennamu yade ankasa wakonya gono wakonya syphilis odepua ana candidiasis me so ani die mpa de obaye say obeto Zahara G capsules ene Zahara mesha anopa odi mi a uyi G capsules mienu na wahwie mesha nkakra na de amene anwumre so odomfo ye wadom na nya bibidi na akoda na why the same thing me say ennamu yade bia wasi nkonwa awo abrabom bia awe bas obeko amwade ho woni mo bia pressure one so ana diabetes ekuno say odi ni adisaduro bia ndaso ni bia se obi beje ne nkwa gi awurade ya manenom hindi heba eno so di tua na obo na forma gona pressure na wo soro wo fema eba mfinfin asi hye yale won so a away bas ebekọ zahara nure nya na babia bekọ bia obenya bia to pebito na ebeboa wo afa zet mineral water aye nsukrogin a Dr. Abayo Dompema ko faba me pa cho banum su eno na me kan fama wo zet mineral water eno an ye nyina ye nom na ebusi immune system ena ye de bibini hand sanitizer so abeka ho na sanitizer o de robe won sa me se sanitizer bi hye ho a unsuro covid o ubetimi kura chiabo na we no kura yare no enyan me pa cho tie mi pa enti ubesu hand sanitizer use original hand sanitizer bibini black man de no na me kan fama wo ebo adwuma pa enye wo nko a Agent Avenue Ventures say mimi sa se wo fi a wo ton ana wa asase a wo ton wo dane aya wo nya nsinwie na wo ton e me pa cho ni nyina mu no mo se hwe mo kira kwan e wo abase ya open edan dia ma han na so obi ade ma han ni nyina ofre Agent Avenue Ventures ya wo mbekọ moa ama won so wasomadwo afi obaba dan so a top coat roofing system na ye kan fama wo top coat akofa IBL self lock any ahodo piaba ne border fem na the border so a what him say you who and munyam e wadansim ya was scotch so ho scotch papa na so ne border fem obehu na kira kwan e wo abrepo otra girl school no a otra bridge no ape onsani fa so omene akokọ space e opposite bowura ho na here top coat for na more than so ma ho what madam roman ne o maso yasen ye ko Parliament House na yakotie supplementary budget no Mama Kofi Frimpong Diga Kwaba. Kofi Akwaba.
Yeah, Jakwabe.
Nampomo.
Nyako Padaron be Biaboko.
And the Beko Parliament House. They're very necessary.
And the
crap the Parliament House.
Yes, and the crap. Now Kwame sister about what's the first pan Kabadista and say Kiashasi.
Say Parliament Omajai and Opacetin.
Ah, insanity. And tea.
Sabi Krakomo you
go soon tea here we say Mr. Furiata supplementary budgeter. Supplementary budgeter constitution man ho kwan. Emma afibia in the middle of the year no minister bia call parliament na okwasha Ghana budget mukena say you know minister we will be the last supplementary budget for the tenure the first term of Nanado Danko Akufo-Addo and I said Nanado Danko Akufo-Addo na nti hwe de be piem afrim abati egusu a ya monitor feed the senche ebeba nti ba Kwame ye be hwe
de ne amam for the imagine chairman nti tioma na so he no fafa
supplementary budget no de obeti omu bia no na se person kire wadwena 0208781302 02087811302 ehon ye de adwenche de befa na supplementary budget Mr. Furiata wo parliament sia wo di tudwa no die bia kire wadwene no obetimi dia o message aba ni acheche bu dia kire o dia opese wo de ka ho no opese wo kire wadwene so a obetimi dia fa so wo de my SMS so a be kenkan dia ma mo a mo stream program na live no o Facebook no facebook.com/Kessben facebook.com/Kessben na Twitter so ukoja message o hono ma ye be kenkan dia ma twitter.com/Kessben TV na YouTube so say youtube.com/Kessben TV emu bia no wo do adwen che de fa hono ma ye be kenkan amount na say na confirm completely say some secret service numbers no I am fan to that say bia na assembly si wa kopia assembly so na historic say betimi dey develop Ghana an investigation bi na person ye de ma wa numbers ni dey tro fato 0243 633 938 0243 633 938 and I say 0244 443 0244 434716 0244 434716 and I say 0244 020051 0244 020051 and I say 0242 372599 0242 372599 and the crack no 0248 300 0248 300 and I said 30042 tebu bia no wo do adwen che de fa hono mo a unya asema na sa asembisi na pese utia Kessben breaking news desk no utia na so na ebe hwehwemu do ma wa ofresa na ba me de tu dwa no mu bia no a ye be di akire na ye be jo aba na ye be di akire na ya be story na e dia ma na mom sabre de numbers a ye di dwuma mo a mo hwe TV no de mo hu say egu screen anim obetimi de ama WhatsApp obetimi de ama text message normal SMS ye be kenka de ama na emom mo a mo tie no bi timu biem 02087813002 02087813002 kwame.
Okay, me pacho baby awo bia na o television no hawa ye say nkania no bi edundum ti amanfo ntimi monitor. Me pacho o tie mi a ya wo information center bi oboko no mo biabiem say the medical kama sagas pa ho no. Ese om de abo TV kakraka all for breaking news. Kotena ho na TV. Na wo adwonche bia na de aba. E na denchamo so nso ode shiku ye say denchamo so na Isa Odeshi ena Ben Apia Grace Saba aso mu nyina so abiem kakra adamu TV abo na ano Messi area ho Yako for Odeshi so ma biem ku a mu nyina abo ademu a omo tie bi yara ma se nkrofo light aduma modde momfa modde mu atirimodene na amanfo etie bi Saba yara ma se ene se wotie na so aja producer o hye ba bi ye hwe se betimi apiki feed no a se tie bi amfa sound no ma yen na yenko
Very much. Second is the motion. Second. We have been dealing with the second. All those people say, don't say no. The eyes have it.
Accident investigation of progression 2020 the second time.
Kovi,
Yeah, Kwame.
who expected something different from Ken Oforiatta Hwana, honorable?
Kwame, me expecting no maybe be expecting no maybe if you say budget no last year, you know.
First quarter no.
You see, we know you're different from state of a nation address. You better the state of the nation. Na in punto aban no pese odiguna kwemu no. As a per the definition of the supplementary budget, which is aban ebia sika nanka kosha ntrase pa no nanka kire se ebia aban no sika so do bon man ho bra no baabi wo ho no mu a bia tema bi aba ayi benya se yedi bihyem
Nsachaya ba mu
yedi bihyem anase ye koyanim no ano aban asan ama anisuade hu bi asaba ayi sabe hia sika de be sa no ma no etimi expect enane se nan say na do dan kwakufu ado akoka te short say ye be 600 seater hospital bed kufurudia. I'm expecting say be pure supplementary budget because nini na buy be sika de be sa 88 hospitals are buy so oba be sino me expect say be hu sika no e bia the first phase no e be pure supplementary budget ni na ya hu ba bia e be kwa akosi afei minister no last ohwe People's Assembly ye no Kia University na minister Siama ebe ka kire nze Buankra Lamport no omo unveil the contractors no it is say unveil on contractors no ka kire say the Friday
unveiling 20 factory bi show
che ye bepa contractors no hontoma eti ye program no Tuesday ne okase baba Friday se bia ya unveil say ya unveil no ye de enim team I'm expecting say bia aban no so bia obeka ho asem na ye twa ho sika bia ye na ebedi achi because ada me say former youth organizer Ashanti regional youth organizer for NPP you better ha say why see
lawyer Justin Kudia from Pong better say Buankra oma shase enti I'm expecting say ebia no so be pay budget in a whole lot we have a lot to talk about now what do you make of this say Nanado aka some few months ye beto ne so aba na all project ya uncomplete ye uti na o se abe cut sword a share project for biase am focus na wo kura Ghana fo nya decide wo faith nwie obeda on see beto aba ma wa sha hye cut sword na mpo ne wa sha hye dada wonwie na cut sword foforo eye wodwen o man ne ho se anye bi kura ne anto ama no kura no nipa foforo a oba o meto aso ana asesen adwempa ade a wo ye adwempa kwamanfo ka se na wonim se beto aba ma wo sa cut sword ye papa na muntu a wo tui wo dwen ho se
sa na dey senke because
we true Ghanaian
say to about the mawa or mandate no end 6 January 31st it is all your president today and let's say bia baby medu no mi we a se bia ebia na mantimi am ye president na ade bi wo ha se wo ye bo man no ha onye kwamiti dia no mo ye no kwame aneke ye pa but sisi enam se Ghana adekoti man kofo tibi kasa no mani na fi se saban bi hye bibia se a aban a obeba no ento aso no eno na ama yemu bini ya
ni development agenda bia wa ha na be den
ya dwe tata because constitution no e hye sa article 25 re hye se se aban bi ni saka project mi na se oni hokra no aban a obeba no e se o continue it there are so many a year I'm see ya jeje gu ho no ni na simre bi o hye last Sunday na Reverend Bishop Ajinasare na oka ho asem se aban eye bibia ojagu ono mo a na aban foforo ba no pese oyo no ye ne de eno na man kofo bisa question say yenim say 88 hospitals kwame o man panyin timi fa 5 months ni si 88 hospitals o timi fa 5 months no ensi sa 600 seater bed hospital na wa promise people of Eastern region kwame cannot Jamaica right say but say science systems ni eye adwuma hallelujah your development policy no say eye adwuma pa kwa be hallelujah ma ni nara say the minim say o man panyi bai o man panyi ko for time no obe end no yenim say in October September na omode call parliament and your passes say free maternal care Jamaica what say nipa obey ko wo akwa wo so first pan nke gisika twitwi die na obi wo ko awo ne kano a osemam fami nko hospital mo mame menwu ofie na afi ye hwe hu say nipa na hwere omo nkwa awo mu no mo na ankasa na ye je omo awo awofie Jamaica what say you stop us adam to study ni chen say nipa na ntimi nyesika mfantua hospital bills no elitina ya omo forso ema ye nananom mo anatete no omo num kwan ye faso gi awo no omo ne awo ofie ni ebi wu ni sa no man in order to cancel all these things as a some free maternal care eba what the free maternal care eba no na process Jamaica ye na kakra in ye omo bro for the ko omo kan say say yeah no kakra
due process
na esemu say progressive say implementation it kwa me na esemu say ukowo kra go through the free maternal care no a say ukwa antenatal free ani bibia no na esemu say ka akora no wo na so yoba bema wo de ne ko the time no soon as alright enough abetimi circumcise no wo de ne ko hospital dey can see atwa dua no free ba tamel so ba no no be yidu to etotwene baby ya nte ho asem bi kwame enne ye circumcise nkofo gisika kase e hospital eti sa no mani ni na ka ho na edie ye o man ye die nya kwame shosha asokore mampon o sha affordable house na no amampani kofo ye say we because I remember vividly when NDC came I had the opportunity to interview this woman Madam Hanabisu that time no a deputy minister for work and housing you be say how come that asokore mampon up to now yet minti ho hwe was no that be abaye ye hwehwemu fi se kofo bi aton ade na dia ma omo ho na kwame say hwehwemu ayeye no hwehwemu ayeye no since 2009 I granted that interview no yetimi aye san hwehemu sa aba be se nei 2009 besi 2020 11 good years ni kwame up to now ade na da so ho omo kokate sort e wo dede so a me kai say President Kofo the minister for work and housing honorable Hakbaru Suajiman e kokate sort say ye ba besi affordable housing e wo dede so a e wo asante mantem ha sei kwame besi de ya ate ho asem biem dede so afo omo hwe dede so afo be di madanse say ne krese yabaka to sword I see ebesi affordable housing eno ye nte ho asem biem enti sa de no na etwetwere ye ni na ya bo ehunu se adeti na aban ba ye project bi an ye jago ye be kai so for line interchange ye deny aware the so for line interchange was started in the way back in 2007 13 good years ni ye da so te ho ye wie interchanges bebrebe ye da so ti so for line interchange o ama road and transport minister e be kire mu kire yen honorable ofori ata kire mu kire yen say Tama President Kufo no the internal generated fund and a day. Eti abai for buy no na say obu pia de to nche no me yes o mo akasa be fund de aye eti conform ba na from China Jew for no buy a omo ye adwuma no a na mi se omu sika na ese nka ba ne de ma omo no omo antimi afa omo anye gya yi ye fe de say interchange ni go nto omo ba no omo ba be hyemu kena no ma finance China Jew for no ama omo antimi aye kwa me ye monitor se o hwa yi for research omo de about coalition of NGOs in the health yi for omo de abetu dwa say omo ko last April omo data na che there are some hospitals, be about 88 hospitals, 88 district hospitals. President Mahama, Eshasia, Abawi Ban, one so Babaja, Kwame. Chese, Senka, MSI, you are in a kind Dr. Gabriel Benakun. Dr. Gabriel Benakun, on the year, sorry, my man corrected me, was a 53 health project across the country. And on much say, I buy we buy and say, on so then Saka, quite will jago. I'm on so a yan dear. Jamaica Rata say, it is a colossal buy, 53 health says facilities, no, so twice. I come in here said district to be a 53 no call twice. Come in, say, could be a Tihanma, you be a question.
Ubedia is a COVID by a man such a piaba. A question I expect to say will be Emano. And a two Sabre Yan to a man peninsula by a cotton swabaya. Walk at the sword say will be see one rooms I can see. I don't know, bet me a man, Crofona will be see Eastern region for no. I don't know who say Bia with another cat sword. It's Yantuano Swat, Yantua Manoa, a beer project in the cow. I don't say strategy. Send here, and then what cat sword or regions in the Muja Korea Swaba. Then the Panakaso, and Antua be any power for bound to us. I don't see a strategy. Okay, many honorable Kennedy can come Kushiania Chunkomo. Honorable Kennedy can come Makwaba. Adumarakwa, Yamuyepa, Honorable Kennedy can come motoring Kane, where Emrasheva Jenny, Ewan Shire Swabaton Pesaso. Obani or Parliament House, yeah.
Ali wadaro I have a question coming.
A Kosi can come, Kennedy Kosi can come.
I don't know.
Why do you bring some Sakabi? We are so inside, we are so inside. There, I see Tikron Quagina. And she's a private we back when they buntimun camuna Montrasso, mewa. Nati, Ulogonium Fepa, made a better TV.
Lucy a dogs. Nipa Lucy and a dogs were saying, ma, or more in election. And then Lucy and I let it make kind of home. Na ultimate boa amana na danko kufuado ane parliamentary candidate ni na ultimate you know most people no e wo Ghana ma mu hase
honorable who parliament house yeah share ni mu say photo sam for beba now this supplementary budget na bra yin minimum expectation unya my dear what expectation is saying
well meaning I think say you know any ade SEO we are saying na so we are not in normal times and the expectation on there. And yet we said yeah, quite normal budget expectation. I say the budget the share I see carry benya. Na ya hekwa be fa so ebedino. Se event e ebedino, na fi say double send the benya. And then kodo na agency ho. And I come multilaterals and go and say multinationals and ho. No mama ya bosia na support budget no. But as it stands now, no, the revenue no na our my mohano. A cost from because of COVID-19 and you know, the bit is a hub. A revenue come from the bit is a airport. The revenue come from over all the hospitality industries are. The hospitality industries are. The can be is hotels, beer bars, sports, even bars as well. Which make us say one way the other no COVID-19 no am I effect kaka na ye nim say ye de kanea ne nsuo bɛkyɛ at a point in time but do baabi no na sɛ yɛde saa nneɛma no nyinaa ɛkyɛ nti saa nneɛma wei nyinaa dɔ na nkyɛn na nkɔhwɛ expenditure no akɔ soro more do ali wonim sɛ yɛ testing COVID-19 sample mako bi a yɛtua about $5 if nipa dodo ɔmanya COVID-19 na head test dodo a yɛarane na multiply it by $5 saa sika wei yɛyɛ budget last year no na yɛnyim sɛ biribi sɛ bɛsɛ yɛafa nka ho hwɛ sika a akyekyɛ ama nkurɔfoɔ for support na ɛnka ho hwɛ ɔma ɔmunya covid no ɛkwan ɛfa so hwɛ ɔmu na ɔmu ɛnka ho hwɛ isolation center ahodoɔ ayɛyɛ yɛconverte awak na ɛdɛ isolation center yɛakɔ converte some hotels ne ɛdɛ isolation center ne yɛakɔ converte Pentecost convention center awugomu afɛtɛ na yɛde ayɛ isolation center ne nyinaa wɔn convert saa na no hospital a ɛyɛ cost na yɛnim sɛ biribi sɛ bɛba nti na nka budget ho nti definitely sɛ sia no what I'm expecting is say ɛnna akyi ɛbɛn nnura nyinaa no ɛyɛ Ghana Health Service ame ake sɛ COVID-19 ɛnyɛ zero case ananyɛ saa ɛkyerɛ sɛ yɛ stabilize a yɛbɛba fam nti kwan bɛfa so yɛbɛbrɛnge ɛyɛ economy no to the toe no ɛne adeɛ a yɛhwɛ kwan a finance minister ɛbɛfra apa no a ɔbɛkyerɛ how best we can bring it back to the economy back to the normal road.
Na o de na wo keka nneɛma a afi mfitiaseɛ yɛde gu akwan mu na enka ho na yade da afui ma unexpected buy a yabɔ ho ka COVID-19 funding so de ko mu so mo expect de mo de yɛ sɛ papa bɛbɔ so ana sika kompa
on the COVID-19 funding no ɛyɛ ade bi a yɛbɔ ya yɛ person kɔfo a omu ɛwɔ bie ɛwɔ mo nsɛm na corporate bodies a mo ma shon bɛbɔ ano ana so fresh camera na de ɛmɛtutu so de mɛyɛ ni saa no mani nyinaa yɛ ade bi a yɛwɔ nkɔfo mo hwɛ so sɛ ba sɛ nkɔfo no ayɛ ready ɛde ɔmo accounts nyinaa no ɛde ama ɛyɛ finance no ba ɛde bɛbu nkonta aba bɛka ho but from me de minimum sɛ ayɛ ade a sɛ wanka ho asɛm kora no a yɛbɛready am a briefing wɔ ho nti ade a definitely no ɛbɛka nneɛma a ɛkɔ so wɔ ho
Honorable Premo to apan sima aduanan mienu kɔbɔdɔnko ɛbrɛ bɛ pɔte na yɛhwɛ sana hene ni mu
ni on sɛ yɛkɔ parliament a yɛka sɛ yɛbɛyɛ budget a ɛnyɛ budget nkwa ne adeɛ yɛ o ɛnnɛ sɛsi a mete parliament inside a minimum kase yɛwɔ land bill a yɛyɛ ho adwuma yɛbɛready no for the third time so what I meant no yɛwɔ bills bebree kwa ɛda anim a aircraft accident investigation and prevention bureau bill I know you have come once since yeah University of Skills and Training and Entrepreneurship Development Bill and also yeah baba young one and the time way now yeah one juma and sana finance minister Afrapano about deliver the media budget not their mind yeah table some of the bills now so they will detail third reading our parliament
na chesenka e normal you know emre bi atwam na motena sha no pane dia ka se mo wie we nyina kra ma wokenkan
sa
anyway
but normal you can ban na system no ya wona bi wait me ho adwuma ansa na ya mala kwa na ba so for the boy one and a time bound the engineer file no at a particular time about me higher than so
they say a floor of parliament and then pa na say e cost this year
yeah discuss it bill be your friend is saying aircraft accident investigation and prevention bureau bill and I say I can't was much this year if you so your land bill so at home you better do for the third time yeah
therefore TV the ekokɔ so nyina ye the ewura no nyamfo kwasi kankam adawroma nhia so MP na aircraft de na efade ho bi ani kakra
accident on the accident and investigation aircraft accident investigation and prevention bureau bill almost say, oh, I see players that I ran over the bounce. Maybe I see accident that see and find Kusia. Almost a two boy, Bapa, I feel I best say, and Raman, one, there are more terms of preference in the four. Instead of me, and maybe I said that I want you. So maybe crow why I'm rather. Being on the year for Fra at the parliament and son of parliament at Yasi. The book about Nessica woman in your woman. Nay, come on in Peswa, ceremony I come. Being an idea, bringing it to speed. Your coaches can answer the other kind of a couple. I be in maybe why I they are buffer for. The one so a old one, a revival.
Abani adase yenya na also support wo mo ye be share chebia ye be fro na ni watu anko ba twetwe ne so Honorable Kwasi Kankam emrashe bedwani insha so abatom pesha so efense Kennedy Kwasi Kankam insha so abatom pesha so MP nemum afi kona wi area onua Stephen Amwa stika ene kosi na nemu ewo insha so abatom pesha so sa kunya kro no oteso no a eso no kwata na minim bench ne be ko back na se be front ziga
Obey backbencher for the meantime. Eti ebi a performance no na ye share say you good and ebi a the leader of your group no say minority group chairs no this osmesi we say because say you move no kakra na bi aba medal na you move kakra na afi na obasa me hu say na eba parliament sia me hu say some MPC bia me na me hu say there should be a front benches. No, okay, kwame ubisa na se bi emede o say COVID-19 spendings no we expect say aban bebu hu konta na kwame o ka se bi o say na aban nim say ye be wura COVID-19 to share budget ya prepare for
it is easy ka say director na wa me ahwe background no ye hwe parliament house in case say hu say minister wura mu na quickly ye biato
etina ubisa na say o share budget ye reading in November no na ya fan shemi say yare bi say na say si amena o ka say according to the deputy minister for health Dr. Okoboy was just say Abaya spending $35 million on COVID testing. $35 million. They are testing ipa 346,990.
And no one said no one can.
The American watch say it not just $35 million here. Now a buying and you're not gonna say we see the best yare. So unexpected. And say baby a bank ko yi say can free say di bi koka ho and say ni na ka ho bi and ye ba supplementary budget. Kwame here to ye. Here to ye we are not in the normal times. We are expecting more from the finance minister today. Kwame.
Areshamayama yanya hoho bi ewo fidua mu ha na mobeka ya mfimpinu ene dunkro ni mu 2019 National Festival of Arts and Culture womo akansie bi omotasi a ye hwa yi oba ahofefo okasa daye wadesua odi hunni asiesie hu yie ni nyina nkamfu ya na ye hwe amamremu a usipisita na ye de ensa atene so sewo ena afi yebo abaso say National Festival of Arts and Culture afi yemfa aboten emmowo na afi ya mekan 2019 de miaminu yaba adwoa ahene wa nti ena ohuridi kan na baba wa yekire se sabe ye kire so ane de jawo wa nyine ukomu adi be yawo ti won tena show hwa ma yankɔ frɛ no wosimpie so no nkɔ kyeakyea no to da bi nyɛ no nko a ɛne yɛ twam afɛ na de adwuma hyɛ ne nsa ti covid-19 ya bai obi ayɛ na fam de nti ɔno no a wakɔ beauty pageant ya wadi nkunim ɛwɔ amamre mu no ɛdɛn no wɔyɛ babunu dɔsɔdɔsɔdɔsɔ no ɔte a tababa wa minim ne ɔkɔtu nifo na ne ɔtu nifo paa ɔkɔ nhyira no ahyira no sɛ covid-19 brɛ mu ɔno nso dɛn na wɔyɛ nkyerɛkyerɛ bɛn na ɔde ma mabunu titiriw na yɛn so yɛabɔ yɛn ho ban afiri covid-19 mu yɛn nkyɛ deɛ nyankopɔn awowa no current aban so ma ɔde na bɛkɛn sɛ wasantimentam na asantimentam deɛ Kessben deɛ ɔde yɛ asɛm wamfa na sɛ wama no no enti mia me wɔfa na adeɛ nyinaa Center of National Culture Kumasi yɛ opani a mprempre yɛ wɔda no berema asumadu sechi ɔno a na kura ne bayinsa sɛ ne wɔfa asensu ɛna wɔtenetene no sɛ yɛmfa na mene ababa we bɛtwetwe nkɔma nsa na yɛ fast akɔ parliament na before no na menhyɛ sɛ free me wɔfa hɔ berema asumadu sechi hɔ na ɔmo amaneɛ no sɛdeɛ amamra ne ka no no wie a ɔbɔ amaneɛ no wie a mene ababa wa no atwetwe nkɔmɔ papa yɛ mo akɔ abɛfo bi sɛ
nyame adom ɛgye so mede nkyia kɛseɛ firi amammerɛ fie so brɛ ɔne wahwɛfoɔ ne onuanom nyinaa Kessbenfoɔ nyinaa
amammerɛ fie mepɛ sɛ mbɛkyerɛ fugu hyɛ sɛde obi bɛkyerɛ ntoma fura no
yɛabra
mba bɛkyerɛ fugu hyɛ ɔde yɛkyim kyɛ ne to
ɛkyɛ ne dama bi a wɔdidi
mo wahwɛ ɔkɔnya asɛm daakye papa akɔaba agya obi bɛhyɛ wo nante seɛ ne sɛn
yo nyale mi dase bebree memfa kyia kɛseɛ ɛma yɛwura ɔpemsoɔ de Kumasi ahemfo nyinaa ɛne nnuanom a ɔno ɔmo di dwumadie sonko ɛwɔ Kessben ha saa na yɛwura regional minister ne yɛwura mayor ɛnso yɛkyia ɔmo nyinaa ne wahwɛfoɔ yɛnwua ali sɛde waka no afi atwa mu no yɛwɔ dwumadie bi a Ghana man nyinaa yɛ di no National Festival of Arts and Culture oba Ghana ha dia ɛno nkoa ne obinyo ka sɛ festival ɛwɔ the whole Ghana a di yɛkurokuro dunsia ne nyinaa bɛhyia na ɛkyerɛ yamane ne amammerɛ danadi wɔ kwan sonko so saa festival anaasɛ dwumadie yɛwura kyɛmaten ɛyɛ alankyɛmaten ne papa ɛna de baeɛ na ɔde baeɛ nanka na ne suadeɛ hunu sɛ nka bɛn no Kumasi ankoa anaasɛ asante region ankoa mbɛnfo yɛ sɛ ɛmfa nkɔ Ghana man nyinaa nti afi atwa mu yɛ no kofodua na dwumadie no bebree na ɛwom ebi ne saa traditional beauty pageant na yɛaka ho asɛm no afi atwa mu deɛ no regency nyinaa dunsia no de ɔmo nipa bae ɛyɛ hyɛ so na yɛnwan ɛyɛ adwoa ahenewa ɔno na edi kan ɔno nso na osi Eastern region Western region for anamu to ne di kan odi kan no na se do di kan no eje wa ne de asoa wo to di kan na je se dwumadie bi wo ho a o se odidi de boa de kire akansie no ne mfaso a wo so enti no ekwa se afi yale a ato abechiyen also so your president asen ewura His Excellency na Akufo-Addo dwumadie pa odima ɔman no enso so na asen na yɛboa enti dawubo no na ɔno so ɛfa to no ho so sɛ ɔbɛboa na wabɔ dawuro afa yare kodi ewe ho ani hia sɛ yɛbɛdi mmra ɛwɔ ho ne ho de akade nyinaa sɛ bɛ ya yare ebi emeto nkyɛ nti ɛba ha na waduru asantima mu ha untimi nko ba bia wabra o ma Kessben ha na na sɛ de wasa akapoma no wanwamu no adonti na sɛ eba Kessben ha na de nchia ebre asanteman na afi yetie yenwa ba no na no disema ode ebre asanteman
na fa fo sia da mase by so do na talent bia ehye kukuam no
eno so pipi ba sa eden so adi pa
akora bi ho no a ne obeye no papa enye book asem nanso wanya konya nkenkan ti na se otete bukase sa na me hyramo na monkoso a monhyemu kena se de be ya talent do na ehye kodo ase no ebenya asi kodo dua so mama oba na kwa oba pa na se
nyame ade
bodi mama ade
ajwa ahene wa nti
Adwoa
ahene wa nti
adwoa ye ni
we seshini
definition
we seshini also
o baba la nwa
boy elder Anthony Yaunti
o mama
Agatha Nti
o school sir
ngo primary school was John Bita young go Jesus John Bita Bangola SS Sectec
this was a tech of what
she also seshini
ari afonye
menya 25 years
ateka eja bien
Mbache David
ekoja bi elebi enibi
David
ele boyfriend ya
no
ele boyfriend ya
no
so Alex mama me pasa me nko adi nkoma mu nti bi aka be ha adwen ato me limu e say o western of right
Achai
na those days na ye
western region
ene umudu cause region so pa ya kabo mu kura uhudi kan na ya chemu na say obetimi ka katu abomu ka bi che say before
Mitchia say for betimi o yeah ben great best betimi natio name was a she also 3 days ago and mama meju Ashanti region inti Mr. Bechinyo boy ya lewo brain be hoso na beliso na you creating her your bona your phone and you tete he ifi ye man you know ese ko so etebra na nelie ma boy oyo na twifo na chenyo boy ya ne ko shanin oboka anache omoka na you creating bona ye fa enchi pa your bra your man yen
ababa na say ko western region fu a wo ba nie na de o ka che mu amo sehwi impotemu a just last week motin nkan no na mo say de obaye no hono anu abi en wo ye ne ha enti wo bia wo tin church bia kwaso a na di so na wo nua bi so avie off a bona beti say de nua ba na be kan ye nkoso ni so na wo kan sawika se wo si anwonya etete wo si yare tan wo ya ba hatawie mu amani pada sani ni nyina ayaye something which is there no yempia no mfiri ona ya brabo enkoso yenkatwi na sabe dodo na atiase pa wo sha se free hifa
Pacha me say for Eastern region.
Na ko pie.
Na me ba Central region, na me ba Western region. And na me be pie Western North region. Na nyamia be pie mo Ashanti region.
Ofi awo kwan.
Ye kwa Greater Accra region.
E dan ti na wo yes campaign.
Me pacha after na fak no, ye nyina ye wani so ade ho. Say nanka ye be ben mpinfo ma a o menya baby agina wo ye man mu aye queen mothers na ya ma kola ye ni ye hu say ma so e wo nepa afi so na nka ye be san ko schools mu na tre say nkola afi no mu nya mo hu say Ghana ye so wa amamre na nya ne ye sua wo afoforo de so no ena afi so na nka ye wo partners bi e wo Germany aye ni o mo lazy lazy naturally say yeah get it close to our local communities now we hear boreholes any say public toilets near there not say wow Ghana has say but I will be as a medium keke and I are bunny a buy amani say nyina no I say e konkon wa yintini emfa emma limelight name na ne saying ye COVID-19 intia na o say na ye boa na ye pamo ya re free empotemu na je say ne da ye ni so ne yetimi aye na ye ni yi inti eno na edemene nam me bo ho dero na afensi okra PPs ka cry de be cheche nkofo na ya twero mo say ye no cry ya ne wo ho ti embo ye ho ban free ya re no na che say ye ntimi nko ye nyuma say de na etie dada no
eti minim kwan ya wo fa so carry wo education yi obetra FMC ana wo kumase yi ahefo na opese wo hihia wo no mo radio so campaign na wo ya na wo ya na say
radio so campaign ka ho no ntina me wo ha say no but me there I have a nursing background. I'm a nurse by profession. And because of that, I am trying to hit the grassroots. And also with the education, not just the education. You have to make an impact. If you want to make an impact, how do you make an impact? You have to get close to the people you want to talk to. Get close to them, talk to them, eyeball to eyeball, and then let them know that this is what you have for them. And I know and I believe that if those market women should see me in the market trying to preach about the COVID-19 now, we need to in danger. Into me say me ben wo mu na me ne omo didi nkomo I say ye ko na ye be ni nyina bibia ye to sini no as we are moving we try to build on that into baby on my you do and we tried using the information center but it didn't help. You get into the market and realize that you can man but say wo ben nipa no na woni ni di nkomo ma utimi wo say otie wa so pem obisa questions we na no a obekọ na baba so no asa o hye ne mask na ote ho nti e crying speakers aye de nam nti be wo say market no ye mfa market ni nyina mbom ebia e fa kakra na yegina ne nyomo mo na du nkomo kama ewe a esimo obia nsori obia nsa ne nema ho ne mfa ne ma na ewo ne ye mfa mamo ne acha mo me free ho a ne akọ baby foforo yedu baby foforo no ma na twese ne ewo no so no no ye de ama mo nti ye de ne sana ye de aircrawl
enti PPs do say na ashanti region de be na kwa be na be fa so ache no
say dem ka ye no no won say ye be ye be din kita ho ye din kita ho ni hwia na be ye din kita ho no na ya tna ne nema ho ne ya che ye wi ani ya move akọ the next lane obi antna ne nema ho ye kasa ye kra system obete ye nka ye wi a ne ya che no line by line oben ya ye please forward go with us and we don't want to be overcrowded. We are going to practice the physical and the social distancing as well. As we are going, yes, we are boy and hobby. If we say so, maybe do main person, I'll end up with the COVID-19 virus as well.
Na Diga,
yeah,
me na no AD asumsem kan bi o bibia obisa no
yeah
so na won ne kan asumsem bi o
me shed any question be abisana but you see the concept of NAFAC no version of the somebody say chimney na din komo pi afan I say good step. I'm also expecting say in the next say promote your culture no in the next edition no you make sure say you best share your culture no mukena obi bia obewe no menim say they said we are not in the normal time. This year, time here with me. Ukoye the winner of NAFAC Nesibia, Oko champion any other course. Bare isolation is a people and confirm pay attention to it. They'll be reluctant to it. So, and as we are a year go forward, no, what I'm expecting is the winner of the subsequent year say NAFAC no should champion the culture of this country because just like a President Kufuor drafted the culture policy, there are a lot of things that he done earlier. The other time there's this reality show, Ghana Was Beautiful. I was one of the radio TV stations. I got the opportunity to witness audition, and there's this song called Yekwa Hinkro. Yes, yeah, and my best 150. I line it up, they couldn't sing it.
Okuni he kama mema hade na emamu no nti okuno mbaza he kuno ye kun he kun
yeah they couldn't sing
it. Hinguro
yes of it that time I remember vividly this man no of the obeka no efo kodoma kantin krono one David Donton where the judge almost sat down mo re ho ya pie mo life and sad they make correct say eti ya sa page sa no ma no ye hyemu kena e man kofo unu say say and Ghana yet. In fact, we should use the NAFAC to identify Ghanaian. Yenche Ghana and find NTV. I say Nana Kwame Mpedu started project B. I was expecting the government to throw the weight behind the Nana Kwame Mpedu. You see, also about Ghana, there are some towns to be obudina corrupted. Say it now no money corrupted sa a bedroom may be never hajine. Utfa obi baby to say crofuma. A tafu for new site, I found tafu krofu from and ya kana a corrupted. So Nana Kwame Mpedu decided to bring back distance. Na yes, you obey lazy with the local government. No, na yes, CC, your friend say yes, signboards are you bet me and ya church sound no money now. But
I know Niema Woyano, one of my bontinia. Who said you were impact be a man fast word and a man fast woman.
Start out to me will say but by the end of the day, you realize that you've really made an impact. As I said earlier on, obi on compass obey you na no smart screen to me boy and hobby. But by the time I'll be education, obi say no biash and mask no. It's say enya kasa keke but ye momoti ase nienti was so mask no. And now face so she say mama not jom no. Education now ye FM so any TV so until sekra oni mo bi bisa no. But if you are close to them now maneti as say COVID-19 ebi a wo de wo yobebu no unye bia ba unua no wo fie no asthma no ne wo hypertension no ne wo diabetes no sister no onyem no wo papa na waye oluman no se wunya na de ko fie pe ono be hwe ne nkwa afen so mo ton aduane ansa na o medidi no ton ade ansa wadidi no se quarantine 14 days asa 14 days na won ton ade no wunidi wonye hwe nkola na de maberias no hwan e na be hwe wo mu se wo ma sansem we sei okika sansem wo dwom na utum se ma ni nyina o maya boso wafe no bia hye ne mask. Then realize that they start asking questions. So big grandpa the onim say unya virus na who crying for body ni ma obusu for obi him, but unya virus na body ni get touching na just we ask now buy no no say right no we enjoy be inti as the education is ongoing no let's hit the grassroots young go down to their level near more months say yare no e wo ho but ut na FM station now trying to say on share the mask onye say be ut air condition no tear mask no enya comfortable but o man it say nti e was on shena we won say on kasambre by the time you get there everybody is in the mask. So I'm hoping say our journey so far no would make a good impact even in Ashanti region here, and you'll be a witness to that.
Obedi, how many days were?
I'm just 2 days. Achina you be free as say.
Okay.
Then we go to the Greater Accra region.
Oh, you're okay. Oba, I know you're okay. Media, ya so my platform, what can you so? Papa, you do what you say. Intimidation, so. Meaning, say, region be able to be able to see amamre fee. No more the wako. Wonderful. And I remember Ghana hanging amamre fee no so ni Kumasi. The whole Ghana amamre fee ni na any Kumasi. Wonderful. Kumasi so ni yes a video ya kobasa anti ya de crow. Eti mama 1 minute na bonse ni na tofa fetch e omo eti
medate for nyina se na mede obi bia so a o abonten so a bia o ye ni o di ni dwuma bi so ma hye o mun crying na ma tete se yare no enka ho ebeko afin so eye se obe enjoy this discomfort for like a few months na se obe shire forever intimate shire o mo ma ye nyina ye nwa ho hihia mu kakra ye mo ye ho se wo domi a obe hye o mask obe oro nsa obe use sanitizer se me so me do a me yes pepe yemfa kroye odo ene nkabom ne yemfa ntena Ghana na megidi se me no mi ne yes ane ma nyina ebetima pamo yare yi efiri empotem.
Well spoken. Ababa na need a hopper. Bema suma researchi. Papa ya titim ade na di chatwo ansana ya titim this year. Ka bibi chatwo mai. Ya pese ko Parliament House. Ne ko se budget no ya bebo di wo mu a catch up for the bema mo.
Ai. We jam da se de kakra me kan so me nwa ba ide ne se asantema mo yema modin na area president ene na ban omo adwene ho pa boka pa wo se ayare ba yankase hu bra if lockdown no ma ya ye asantema mu ade na nanom so aye ne ade yenhwe na anya kwa yema modin se enwa ba ya no disema ode aba ya ne ebedi so president anu disema ode aba ya ebedi so na ya die ho afi ya ye bonyimu esan se ya ye enya wa edo beko se ge enwa ba no aka no.
Okay, quickly yanko Parliament House ne yanko say renwonya for Kenofoli ata osofo aya wo hye omansi kasem no ntotua so abedura ensamban na ode fa afidie so ama me no mi nyina. Stay tuned.
Strengthen the PFM system to protect the public purse and enhance governance institutions by providing more and adequate resources. Mr. Speaker, from 2007 to date, through the diligent implementation of this plan, we managed to completely change the story. Mr. Speaker, not only should we acknowledge what God has done by turning this country around, but should celebrate his continuous favor on this land. Mr. Speaker, the running theme undergirding all our policies and expenditure plans has been a commitment to invest and improve the lives of Ghanaians to access better opportunities. This principle has underpinned all our programs. Therefore, in implementing the over 15 flagship programs that the President promised, we set out to bring hope, restore confidence in the state, and demonstrate care for the people of Ghana. We sought to restore the self-esteem and dignity of Ghanaians and reduce the grinding poverty that was becoming commonplace. We therefore set out to invest significant resources in the lives of the Ghanaian people by increasing expenditures in education, agriculture, industry, and all of our human capital. Mr. Speaker, in acknowledging that education is the primary driver for upward social and economic mobility, we rolled out a raft of policy measures to improve the opportunities of our people. We invested $3.2 billion to implement free SHS, resulting in over 1.2 million teenagers being in secondary school now, looking forward to better opportunities in life. The Akufo-Addo graduates. For their parents and families, this has translated into $2.2 billion in savings. That is money that the state has put back into the pockets of Ghanaians all across the country, and investments for the state for their future. We have also invested in excess of $1.6 billion in 100,000 jobless but educated young adults who had been ignored by the state and in despair. Through the new NAPCO initiative, they have been engaged in various state and private institutions, with some of them securing permanent jobs in the process. That is money in the pockets of our youth. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, this government had determined that Ghana will be self-sufficient in food production through our Planting Food and Jobs program, and would add value to what we produce as well. Create jobs along the value chain under the 1D1F program, which has currently over 70 factories in production, with many more at various stages of construction. So far, invested over $1.85 billion in our agriculture sector, resulting in agriculture growth which averaged about 2% between 2014 and 2016 to an average of 5.2% over the past 3 years. That is putting food in abundance on the table of Ghanaians, reducing cost of living, and putting money in the pocket of 1.2 million farmers nationwide. We have, Mr. Speaker, relegated doomsday to the past. It is clear to our fellow Ghanaians by now that we have enjoyed 3.5 years of reliable and cheaper power. I've spent in excess of $4.7 billion on capacity payments, not only to ensure that we keep the lights on, but also to pay for power we do not use and the very questionable contractual obligations we inherited. Mr. Speaker, to modernize the economy and improve its global competitiveness, we embark on a transformative agenda to digitalize the economy. We implemented a digital addressing system and the national ID programs to ensure that each Ghanaian and their dwellings, as well as business locations, will be uniquely identified. These efforts are being made to formalize the economy, improve the way services were delivered to our people, and increase productivity. That is digitizing the lives of Ghanaians. Now more than ever, the possibilities of the digital economy has been brought to the fore. Mr. Speaker, to protect the public purse and enhance good economic governance, we set out to fully implement the provisions of PFM Act 2016, Act 921, including parts of the PFM Regulations 2019, LI 2378, to further strengthen cash management, budget execution, and budget monitoring. Consequently, we have, for the first time in the history of our budget management, consistently, Mr. Speaker, published budget implementation reports, midterm debt strategies, issuance calendars, as well as annual debt reports. Mr. Speaker, never in the history of our public financial management have we seen this degree of openness, transparency, and accountability in management of our public finance. This has enabled citizens to hold this government more accountable than any other in our history. Mr. Speaker, while accomplishing all these, we also set out to complete the outstanding policy measures under the derailed IMF program which we inherited. This culminated in our exit from the IMF Extended Credit Facility in March 2019, much to the surprise of our friends across the aisle. The Speaker, The previous government had the penchant of awarding tracts by heart, even when they had no ideas how to pay for them. So to protect the public purse, my ministry initiated and requested the Auditor General to audit and validate over 11 billion CDs of outstanding claims which had been approved and left by the previous government to pay. The Auditor General validated 6 billion of the 11 billion claims. We await the subsequent surcharging of all those complicit in the submission of the disallowed claims from the Auditor General's department. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to inform this Honorable House that we've paid almost $1 billion of the unpaid bills which we inherited and managing the public service in a much more responsible manner now. Mr. Speaker, this government under President Akufo-Addo with these actions has amply demonstrated its commitment to prudent financial management, investing broadly and inclusively in the nation's development, ensuring value for money, and being held accountable for our actions. Mr. Speaker, we've also put in place key structural measures to sustain our path towards fiscal consolidation, growth, and ensure irreversibility. These include the passage of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, Act 982, forging social partnerships with organized labor and employers to enhance the quality of dialogue and implementation. We've also established and operationalized the Fiscal and Financial Stability Councils to enhance the monitoring of government fiscal and financial policies. Mr. Speaker, furthermore, we have initiated a collaboration with faith-based organizations to promote the material, moral, and spiritual growth of our country. This is in recognition of the important role that faith-based organizations have played and continue to play in the peace, security, and development of our dear nation. Right Honorable Speaker, when I presented the President 22 budget, all the indicators of economic performance point towards a path of sustained consolidation and robust broad-based growth. The evidence of our superior economic management was clear for all to see. Honorable members of Parliament approved for government to spend 98,36,690,358 Ghana cedis in the 2020 fiscal year to further the agenda for consolidating the gains to spur growth, jobs, and prosperity for all. Mr. Speaker, a lot has happened since then. While executing the transformation interventions to improve lives and encouraged by the resounding endorsement of the 2020 Euro issuance in February, which was oversubscribed by 350%, the novel coronavirus COVID-19 struck swiftly and unexpectedly. In a matter of weeks, Mr. Speaker, began as a distant outbreak in another part of the world, completely overturned our sense of normalcy. The world, for a period, Mr. Speaker, stood still, and the virus uncontrollably disrupting all aspects of our life. The pandemic spread with alarming speed, infecting millions of people around the world and bringing global economic activities to a virtual halt. Its impact has been devastating on the people, businesses, and the economy of the world, with 2.2 billion jobs, 68% of global workforce under threat. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 pandemic is far more than a health crisis. Ghana has been spared the painful economic and social impact that COVID-19 has visited on peoples in nations big and small all over the world. The restrictions on movements has disrupted households and businesses with consequent job losses and reduced incomes in Ghana. The hotel and hospitality industry, agriculture, health, creative arts and media, transportation, manufacturing, education, our favorite organizations, financial services, young entrepreneurs, all been severely affected. Mr. Speaker, not to mention the extensive informal market that is a lot of us Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, among the COVID-19 pandemic in April, IMF revised its projections to indicate The 170 countries, that is 87% of world economies, will see per capita income shrink in 2020. The latest forecast from the fund in June predicts a decline of almost 1% in 2020 for the world economy. Mr. Speaker, trade is also expected to contract by 11.9%, primarily to the sudden imposition of tight restrictions of movement. This has led to disruptions in the global supply chain, widespread supply shortages, and its attendant increase in prices and reduction in domestic revenues. Sub-Saharan Africa is now projected to contract by 3.2%, 1.6 percentage points worse than the April forecast. Mr. Speaker, the virus has laid bare our vulnerabilities as a world, as nations, as households, and as individuals. So yesterday, Wednesday, 22nd July 2020, 622,725 persons had sadly succumbed to this virus, and 50,240,290 had been infected across the world. Mr. Speaker, even before we fully grasp the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak, our immediate concerns were on protecting lives and preserving livelihoods of people. The President moved swiftly with a $100 billion preparedness plan, which was prescient and laid foundation to implement measures to save lives and safeguard economic activities by improving citizens' access to essential public services and helping business weather the downturn. Mr. Speaker, thus far, the health consequences of the COVID-19 outbreak in Ghana has not as devastating as in other countries. Sadly, as of yesterday, 22nd July 2020, 153 Ghanaians had succumbed to the virus. May their souls, Mr. Speaker, rest in peace. We have since March recorded 29,672 cases with 26,090 recoveries, which puts the number of active cases at 3,429. Has largely been due to the fact that government has shown a leadership of conviction that has been decisive, swift, innovative, compassionate in the management of the crisis, and also because our health professionals nationwide have been heroic in handling the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has also brought to the fore the structural gaps in our health delivery system. That is why, with urgency, we already began to mount an effective, coordinated, and sustainable long-term response to the health needs of the people. Under the Agenda 111, previously Agenda 88 initiative of His Excellency the President's for hospitals, we will design, build, equip, and staff new hospitals in every district without one, and a new regional hospital in every region with none. This demonstrates government's commitment to protect the lives of Ghanaians. The President has declared that all the district hospitals will be designed and built by Ghanaian built companies and will lay the foundation for the launch of the nationwide housing program, God willing, in its second term. Mr. Speaker, these will all be designed by Ghanaians and built by Ghanaian companies. And these construction companies will then have a solid foundation for the launch of also a nationwide housing program, God willing, in the President's second term. Mr. Speaker, we must not and will not be daunted by this extraordinary crisis. Government will continue to do what it has to do to protect lives and supply livelihoods through compassionate, competent, and courageous leadership. We have accepted that this pandemic and its effects are unparalleled in the annals of our country and indeed global. We have accepted that until a vaccine is found, we have no choice but to rearrange our lifestyle in order to protect lives and promote livelihoods. It requires a marshalling of unprecedented resources to contend with the pandemic and its effects Ghanaians. And Mr. Speaker, this government is up to the task. Mr. Speaker, the predicted long-lasting effect of this pandemic amidst systemic shifts and uncertainties suggests 2020 and beyond will be very challenging. Ghana will therefore need a continuity of courageous, compassionate, and competent government with a well-crafted government. Ghana will therefore need the continuity of courageous, compassionate, and competent government with a well-crafted program to protect the lives of Ghanaians, safeguard jobs, and support businesses to sustain operations during this period, and especially in the 4 years ahead. This can only be possible with competent economic management of the economy, and we being at the helm. Mr. Speaker, we have proven over and over again that we are better managers of the economy. Together, we took Ghana out of havoc and placed it amongst lower middle income countries within a decade. Together, we recovered and revitalized a critically weakened economy, and today we can now attract renowned global automobile companies in just 3 years of returning into office. Together, once again, we will optimize the opportunities presented by this pandemic and build a sustainable future for Ghanaians. In the now famous words of President Akufo-Addo, we know how to bring the economy back to life. Therefore, this 2020 mid-fiscal policy review and supplementary estimate is the first of our economic plans to reposition Ghana and Ghanaians to deal with the challenges posed by the pandemic and seize the opportunities it brings. Our response to this pandemic prioritizes the protection of our lives and livelihoods, sustains our business operations, and sharpens our focus on Ghana's future beyond aid. Mr. Speaker, I'm presenting updates and progress in implementing the 2020 budget and highlighting the significant impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. I also outlined today the resolute steps being taken to get our economy back on track. In his May address to the nation, the President charged the Ministry of Finance to design Ghana's recovery program. Mr. Speaker, we wish to take this opportunity to announce to the people of Ghana that the President and his team have done a lot of thinking since March. We have brainstormed over the crisis with a view of using the challenges it presents rather as an opportunity to transform Ghana, and for all Ghanaians. I'm happy to announce that in the coming weeks, the President will launch a 100 billion, Mr. Speaker, Ghana Cities Development Program, an ambitious and unprecedented 3.5-year program called Ghana Coronavirus Alleviation Revitalization of Enterprises Support Program. The Ghana Cares Program, the Speaker, or Bantampa Program, which will anchor the comprehensive transformation of our society. Mr. Speaker, also request supplementary funding to support our priorities of saving lives and livelihoods, supporting businesses to ensure that the health of Ghanaians and their jobs are secure in these challenging times. Mr. Speaker, I now proceed to give details of updated performance for 2019, developments for the first half of 2020, and we'll conclude with the outlook for the rest of the year, present the supplementary estimates. Mr. Speaker, the global economy has, in the past century, experienced some negative shocks which were deemed unprecedented at the time of their occurrence. Indeed, the Spanish flu of 1918, the Great Depression of the 1960s, and the more recent global financial crisis of 2007 and 2008 adversely impacted the world economy. However, as events unfold, it is becoming increasingly evident that the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic effects has an assured place in economic history, as perhaps the singular event that decimated the global economy in ways never imagined. It is a crisis that has tested global national leadership like none other in the history of the world during peacetime. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to have dire consequences on Africa. According to estimates, World Bank economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa is expected to decline from its 2019 value of 2.4% to between negative 2.1% and negative 5.1% in 2020, making 2020 the worst year since records began in 1970 for the continent's economic growth. According to the IMF's Regional Economic Outlook for Africa, COVID-19, an unprecedented threat to development, April 2020. Let us no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that Africa is facing its first recession in 25 years. Sadly, after 2 decades of continual economic progress, a recession which threatens to exact probably the heaviest human toll in peacetime in Africa. It is our responsibility as leaders, as the people's elected government, to work out and execute an intelligent, ambitious, and all-inclusive recovery plan than none other that will steer this nation and her people out of the recession before us. Mr. Speaker, it's a daunting task facing us in Ghana today. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has also affected Africa's long-term structural response to its economic woes, creating the largest trade bloc at 1.2 billion people for a 3.2 trillion economy. Currently, Mr. Speaker, intra-Africa trade is only 15%. The operations of the African Continental Free Trade Area was scheduled to launch on July 2020, right here in Accra. It has now postponed till January 2021. Mr. Speaker, at the time I presented the 2020 budget to this August House in November last year, the projected end-year performance of 2019 was based on available data of the first 3 quarters. Given that we now have the full complement of data, I will now provide an update of the performance of the economy in 2019 to the House. Mr. Speaker, overall real GDP growth was 6.5% as against a target of 7%, reflecting improvement on the 6.3% in 2018. Non-oil real GDP growth rate was 5.8% against a projection of 5.9%. End period December inflation remained 7.9%, with the target being 8%. Overall budget balance, which was projected to end in a deficit equivalent to 4.5% of GDP, reached 4.8%. Primary balance reached 0.8% as against a projected surplus equivalent to 1.1% of GDP. And accumulated gross international reserves exceeded projected 3.5 months of cover for imports of goods and services to reach 4 months. Mr. Speaker, provisional data released by the Ghana Statistics Service in April 2020 showed that overall GDP growth for 2019 was 6.5% compared with 6.3% in 2018. This confirms that the economy has continued with its robust performance in 2017, when GDP grew sharply 8.1%, up from 3.4% in 2016. Non-oil real GDP growth in 2019 was 5.8%, down from 6.5% in 2018. Key drivers of this performance include information communication technology, which recorded the highest subsector growth rate of 46.5%, followed by real estate with growth rates of 19.9%. Mr. Speaker, headline inflation ended the year at 7.9% in December 2019, down from 9.4% in December 2018. In August 2018, the Ghana Statistical Service completed the rebasing of Consumer Price Index using updated information from the Ghana Living Standard Survey of 2017. Headline inflation following the rebasing was estimated at 7.8% for August 2019, moving inflation well within the lower band of the medium-term inflation target band of 8 plus or minus %. Inflation subsequently increased to 8.2% in November due to the upward adjustment in administrative prices, but eased down to 7.9% at end December 2019, supported by lower food prices. monetary aggregates and Mr. Speaker, broad money supply and plus recorded an annual growth of 21.7% in December 2019 compared to 15.4% in 2018, reflecting the return of confidence following the banking sector cleanup exercise. The private sector accounted for 85.1% of the total outstanding credit of 52.2 billion in 2019, representing a growth of 18.3% compared to 10.6% in 2018. In real terms, credit to the private sector grew by 9.7% compared to 1.1% in 2018. Credit distribution was broad-based, with all the key economic sectors recording higher growth in 2019 relative to 2018. The main beneficiaries were services 24.1%, commerce and finance 20.9%, and manufacturing 10.9%. Interest rates. Mr. Speaker, the monetary policy rate came down by 100 basis points in 2019 as inflation declined and inflation expectations eased. As a result, the average lending rates declined to 23.6% in December 2019 from 3.9% in December 2018. The 91-day Treasury bill rate, however, inched up marginally to 14.7% in December 2019 from 14.6% in 2018. Interest rates on the 182-day instrument also moved up to 5.2% from 5.0% over the same period. Rates on the secondary bond market also remained broadly stable. Balance of payments. Mr. Speaker, external sector performance remained relatively strong in 2019, supported by a larger trade surplus, a modest current account deficit, and improvements in the capital and financial account net inflows, mainly due to the Eurobond issuance and increase in FDI. The current account deficit narrowed to 1.86 billion, 2.8% of GDP in 2019, from 2.04 billion, 3.1% of GDP in 2018, supported by improvements in the trade surplus from 1.81 billion, 2.8% of GDP in 2018, to a surplus of 2.6 billion, 3.4% of GDP at the end of December 2019. These developments resulted in a balance of payments surplus of 1.34% in 2019 compared to a deficit of 0.7 billion in 2018. International reserves. Mr. Speaker, following the developments in the external sector, the gross international reserve climbed by 20% to 8.4 billion at the end of 2019 from a stock position of 7 billion at the end of December 2018. This was equivalent, Mr. Speaker, to 4 months of import cover recorded at the end of December 2019 compared to 6 months of imports cover as of December 2018. Mr. Speaker, in the year to December 2019, the Ghana cedi cumulatively depreciated by 12.9% against the US dollar compared with 8.4% in 2018. Against the British pound and euro, the Ghana cedi cumulatively depreciated by 15.7% and 11.2% respectively, compared with 3.3% and 3.9% in 2018. Mr. Speaker, government's fiscal operations in 2019 were broadly in line with expectations. The fiscal deficit, excluding financial sector bailout costs, amounted to 4.8% of GDP in 2019, 0.9 percentage points above the recorded deficits of 3.9% of GDP in 2018. The corresponding primary budget for the period was 0.8% against a program reverse target of 1.1%, reflecting 3 consecutive years of recording primary surplus. Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grants for the period amounted to 53.4 billion, equivalent to 15.3% of GDP, against the annual program target of 58.9 billion or 17% of GDP. The 2019 performance also represents 0.1% year-on-year growth. The shortfall in total revenue and grants emanated from both non-oil tax and non-tax revenue. Expenditures. Mr. Speaker, on the expenditure front, total expenditure including arrears clearance for the period was broadly contained within the budget and amounted to 70.3 billion or 20.1% of GDP against a target of 74.6 billion or 21.6% of GDP. Expenditures generally were 5.8% lower than the budgetary appropriation for the year. Mr. Speaker, given developments in revenue and expenditure, the overall balance registered a deficit of 16.9 billion or 4.8% of GDP, which was financed from both domestic and external sources. The total domestic financing amounted to 11.9 billion, equivalent to 3.4% of GDP, and constituted 70.2% of the total financing. Foreign financing amounted to 5.04 billion, equivalent to 1.4% of GDP, against a target of 8.2 billion or 2.4% of GDP. Public debt development. Mr. Speaker, our public debt management program for the 2019 financial year was successfully executed despite challenges from the global and the domestic economy. As at end December 2019, the total gross public stock stood at $217.9 billion, $39.3 billion. Of this amount, external debt amounts to $112.5 billion Ghana cedis or 20.3 billion US dollars, while domestic debt amounts to 105 billion cedis or 19 billion US dollars. The debt GDP ratio as of December 2019 was 62.4%, up from 57.6% at end December 2018, reflecting the impact of the financial sector bailout costs and the energy sector payments. Mr. Speaker, 2019 was a good year. Inflation at 7.9%, growth at 6.5%, deficit at 4.8%, positive price balance, and an improved reserve cover. Macroeconomic performance from January 2020 to June 2020. Mr. Speaker, with that backdrop, we felt set to have a great 2020. Let me now have a report on the macroeconomic performance for the first half of 2020. Mr. Speaker, the following macroeconomic targets were set for 2020. Overall GDP growth rate of 6.8%, non-oil real GDP growth rate of 6.7%, NPL inflation rate of 8%, overall fiscal deficit 4.7%, primary surplus of 0.7% of GDP, and gross international reserves to cover at least 3.5 months of imports of goods and services. Growth. Mr. Speaker, provisional estimates released by Ghana Statistical Service shows that overall GDP growth was 4.9% in the first quarter 2020 compared to 6.7% over the same period in 2019. Growth in the non-oil sector was 4.9% compared to 6% in the corresponding period of 2019. The agricultural sector recorded a growth of 2.8% in the first quarter of 2020 compared to 2.2% during the same period in 2019. Industry sector recorded a growth of 1.5% in the first quarter of 2020 compared to 8.4% during the same period in 2019 because of massively decreased oil exports. Growth in the services sector was strong at 9.5% in the first quarter of 2020 compared to 7.2% recorded during the same period in 2018. Mr. Speaker, headline inflation remained flat at 7.8% from January until March 2020. Inflation, however, rose to 10.6% in April and further to 11.3% in May, reflecting the panic buying that preceded the market fumigation exercises and across the country and the partial lockdown in two largest cities of Accra and Kumasi. Inflation has increased marginally to 11.2% in June as fresh food prices began to decline due to the easing of the restrictions. Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of the year, May 2020, growth in broad money supply has slowed down, increasing by 6% compared to a 7% increase over the corresponding period in 2019. Credit advanced by banks to public and private institutions also decreased the first 5 months of the year as demand and supply for loans dropped due mainly to the uncertainties created by COVID-19 pandemic and decline in aggregate demand. Mr. Speaker, the Monetary Policy Committee of Bank of Ghana reduced the monetary policy rate by 150 basis points to 14.5% in March 2020 as part of broad measures to reinvigorate economic activity. The interbank rate declined from 15.2% in December 2019 to 13.8% in June 2020, reflecting the reduction in the MPR in March 2020 and improved liquidity conditions in the banking sector. Similarly, interest rates on the 91-day Treasury instruments climbed to 13.97% in June 2020, 14.69% in December 2019. Our blending rate also decreased to 21.95% from 23.59% over the same comparative period, reflecting improved liquidity conditions in the banking sector and constrained demand for loanable funds. Balance payments. Mr. Speaker, the current account recorded a surplus of 199.9 billion, 0.3% of GDP in the first quarter of 2020, up by 12.4% from 177.8 billion, 0.3% of GDP in the same period in 2019. The increase in the current account surplus was influenced largely by improvements in the trade balance as well as current spreads. The trade balance recorded a surplus, Mr. Speaker, of $1.0 billion compared to a surplus of $1.2 billion in the corresponding period of 2019, mainly on account of a sharp decline in import growth, which more than outweighed the fall in exports. As a result of development in the sector, the overall balance of payments recorded a surplus of $1.5 billion compared to a surplus of $2.97 billion recorded in the first quarter of 2019. Mr. Speaker, the country's gross international reserves stood at $9.2 billion at the end of June 2020, from a stock position of $8.4 billion at the end of December 2019. This was sufficient to provide 4.3 months of import cover compared to 4 months of import cover as of December 2019. Mr. Speaker, the Ghana CD started the year strongly, appreciating by 4.5% on a year-to-year basis by end of February 2020 on the back of the US $3 billion sovereign bond issue, strong macroeconomic fundamentals, and BOG's forward auction sales, amongst others. However, the deterioration in financial market risk sentiment due to the spread of COVID-19, as well as the seasonal demand pressure from the energy and corporate sectors, weighed heavily on the cedi. On a year-to-date basis, the cedi depreciated by 2.4% against the dollar and the euro in June 2020, but appreciated by 4.5% against the pound sterling, compared to a depreciation of 8.3%, 6.9%, and 7.6% against the dollar, euro, and the pound sterling, respectively, over the same period in 2018. Mr. Speaker, this is the lowest depreciation of the currency in any election year, and especially remarkable in these COVID times. We thank God for the foresight in issuing our Eurobond in February of this year. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of the government's fiscal policy for 2020 has been greatly impacted by the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. Provisional fiscal data for the first half of the year showed that revenue mobilization fell short of target non-oil, non-tax revenues. Let me, however, congratulate GRA's leadership and tax division for exceeding their tax targets by some 600 million Ghana cedis. Expenditure execution, on the other hand, was faster than programmed due to the emergency spending on the various COVID-19 related programs. Mr. Speaker, these developments pushed our financing requirements above the program limits for the period to enable us to address these emergency expenditure pressures. Consequently, the fiscal deficit for the period widened from a program target of 3.1% of GDP to 6.3% of GDP. The corresponding primary balance for the period was in deficit of 3.3% of GDP compared to a targeted primary deficit of 0% of GDP. Revenue performance. Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grants for January to June 2020 amounted to 22.0 billion Ghana cedis compared with a program target of 29.8 billion Ghana cedis, resulting in a shortfall of 26.0% or a performance rate of 74%. This represents a nominal decline of 6.8% over the corresponding period in 2019. Mr. Speaker, non-oil tax revenue comprising taxes on income and property, goods and services, and international trade amounted to 16.7 billion or 4.3% of GDP, 16.2% below the program target of 19.95 billion or 5.2% of GDP. The lower than program performance in non-oil tax revenue was driven by the underperformance of non-oil tax handles such as domestic VAT, petroleum excise taxes, domestic national health insurance levy, and get fund levy. However, personal income and communication tax, services tax, both have performed their respective targets for the period. Mr. Speaker, revenue from upstream oil and gas amount to 1.99 billion, 0.5% of GDP, 55.4%, Mr. Speaker, lower than the program target of 4.5 billion Ghana cedis. This was mainly on account of much lower volumes and significant drop in crude oil prices on the international market, coming as low as $12 at some point. Mr. Speaker, total expenditures including arrears clearance for the period amounted to 46.4 billion Ghana cedis or 12% of GDP compared with the program target of 41.6 billion or 10.8% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, with the exception of interest payments and grants to other government units which were below their respective targets, compensation of employees, goods and services, and capital expenditure were above target due to the additional spending requirements in relation to COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the result of government's fiscal operations resulted in a cash basis deficits of 24.3 billion or 6.3% of GDP compared with the program target of 11.8 billion or 3.1% of GDP for January to June 2020. Mr. Speaker, the overall budget balance for finance from both domestic and external sources. Total domestic financing amounted to 21.8 billion, equivalent to 5.7% of GDP, and constituted 89.5% of the total financing. Foreign financing amounted to 2.6 billion Ghana cedis, some 0.7% of GDP, against a target of 15.1 billion or 3.9% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, the primary balance recorded a deficit equivalent to 3.3% of GDP, higher than the program deficit of 0.01% of GDP, mainly due to lower than program revenues and faster execution of its expenditures. Mr. Speaker, consistent with the front loading of government fiscal operations, the financing needs of government were also front loaded. As earlier stated, the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in the tightening of global financial conditions. Fortunately, our $3 billion international capital market financing was conducted in the first 2 months of the year. In addition, the IMF's US $1 billion rapid credit facility was also executed in April 2020. In a matter of 4 months, Mr. Speaker, through good leadership and international goodwill brought about by efficient management of the economy, this nation was able to raise over 20 billion Ghana cedis to protect the vulnerable, our businesses, and our dignity as a people. Taking into consideration all these developments, the provisional debt stock as at the end of June 2020 stood at 255.7 billion Ghana cedis, 45.5 billion US dollars, representing 66.36% of GDP. The increase was mainly a result of a Eurobond issuance of $3 billion in February 2020, exchange rate depreciation, front-loading of expenditures, and COVID-19 effect, which increased the cedi equivalent outstanding debt stock. The total debt stock was made up of 134.9 billion, 23.9 billion US dollars, 120.8 billion Ghana cedis, 21.5 billion US dollars of external and domestic debt, accounting for approximately 52.7% and 47.3% of the total public debt stock respectively. As a percentage of GDP, external and domestic debt represented 35% and 31.36% respectively. Mr. Speaker, Eurobond issuance. As you may recall, government obtained the approval of this August House in December last year, raised up to $3 billion to finance growth-oriented expenditures in the 2020 budget, including restructuring the energy sector, and also to conduct liability management operations. Based on the approval, Ghana became the first ever country on the African continent to issue a 41-year bond, second tri-tranche bond in the history of the country. Ghana successfully raised $3 billion in international capital markets in 3 tranches of 6-year, 14-year, and 41-year Eurobonds of $1.5 billion, $1 billion, and $750 million respectively on February 2020. The 6-year, 14-year, and 41-year bonds, Mr. Speaker, were priced at 6.375%, 7.875%, and 8.75% respectively. Mr. Speaker, this transaction was a landmark achievement in many respects, as the bond came with the lowest ever coupon rate for Ghana and the first 41-year bond tenor in Africa. In fact, despite the concerns over the COVID-19 pandemic and its potential adverse impact on market conditions on emerging markets, the order book was 5 times oversubscribed. This translated into a peak order book in excess of 15 billion and came on heels of the 7 times oversubscription for the 2019 Eurobond issuance. Mr. Speaker, in line with the use of proceeds approved by Parliament, an amount of $2 billion was earmarked to finance growth-oriented expenditures, $1 billion for restructuring the energy sector in the 2020 budget, and the remaining $1 billion for liability management options. Already, Mr. Speaker, a buyback of $523 million of the maturing 2023 Eurobond has been carried out. The financial sector cleanup and bailout. Mr. Speaker, as stated earlier, the outbreak of the pandemic is having a negative impact on the finance sector here in Ghana and across the world. All over the world, central banks are being relied upon by governments to find the liquidity to tackle the socioeconomic difficulties unleashed by the pandemic. The Bank of Ghana has stepped up the challenge and announced various policy measures to help support the economy and financial institutions in order to cushion the adverse impact of COVID-19 on the economy. It is important to stress that this has been possible. It is important to stress, Mr. Speaker, that this has been possible because of the responsible and competent management of both the fiscal and monetary space since 2017. As a result of mismanagement, Mr. Speaker, as a result of mismanagement, deposit funds had been locked up with no hope that these depositors could access their own funds. The authorities, with foresight and appreciation of the role of the banking financial sector to any economy, especially to oil the engine of the private sector, introduced painful but unavoidable reforms to clean up mess inherited from the previous government. The timely intervention of this administration resulted in the saving of these locked up funds in failed banks. This was a sovereign but necessary action that in total is costing the state, Mr. Speaker, in excess of 21 billion of taxpayers' money. These are funds that could have been otherwise deployed to support the development agenda of the government. Let it be said that a serious government as we are, desperate as we were to face a broken economy as it was, and fund our own programs as promised, and as patriotic as we are, had absolutely no thoughts, no time, no energy, or the luxury to conspire with the central bank to deliberately cause the downfall of Ghanaian banks that were already in zombie state. Fairly insolvent by the time we took office. What we did was to merge those that had failed, save those that could be saved, with the field of building a strong and viable financial sector with integrity. What the President did, Mr. Speaker, which is unusual in banking practice globally, was go the extra mile to save the funds of all deposits of failed banks. Let no one stand on a steeple and proclaim untruths. And let mature Ghanaians be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to be angry. James 2:10.
Honorable members, in view of the time and the business before us, sitting is extended beyond the normal hours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as at the end of the first quarter 2020, a total amount of 13.6 billion, 3.5% of GDP, had been spent on the resolution of failed banks, specialized deposit-taking institutions, microfinance institutions, the establishment of the Consolidated Bank of Ghana Limited, as well as the capitalization of the Ghana Amalgamated Trust. Mr. Speaker, additionally, with the President's directives to fully pay all depositors whose funds were locked up with the failed SDIs and MFIs, an amount of 5 billion was spent. This brings the total expenditure on financial sector interventions as of June 2020 to 18.6 billion, 4.8% of GDP. Government has also committed an amount of 3.1 billion, 0.78% of GDP, towards supporting investors in failed asset management companies regulated by the SEC. Mr. Speaker, this will bring the overall total government expenditure for the failed financial institutions to 21.6 billion, 5.6% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, this is a legacy of financial enslavement from the previous administration. Mr. Speaker, talking about slavery, for all of us who did history for O-levels, remember Professor Dubois' book on slavery, and he described slavery as an unmitigated crime. Legacy of financial enslavement from the previous administration. And that, Mr. Speaker, by Professor Dubois, is a crime, Mr. Speaker, unmitigated. Crime, Mr. Speaker, unmitigated by any extenuating circumstance. Mr. Speaker, while fiscal consolidation and some macroeconomic performance are critical to robust and sustainable economy, President Akufo-Addo believes that this must reflect first and foremost in improvements in the everyday life of, as we know, my fellow Ghanaians. Consistent with this belief, government for the past 3.5 years have been implementing a number of flagship programs and spearhead a broad-based economic and social transformation and deliver these fundamental services to all Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, progress has been made in the implementation of these programs with significant achievements in the implementation of the free senior high school, planting for food and jobs, one district, one factory, infrastructure for poverty eradication program, and nation builders call, amongst others. Soon to add 111 hospitals. These programs have brought needed reliefs and impacted positively on all the lives of all ordinary citizens. Mr. Speaker, free senior high school has given parents and guardians a cumulative total amount of 3.2 billion since 2017, and that is money in their pockets and investments in their future. This intervention has sustained the schooling of 1,199,750 students to date, a marked increase from the 813,443 students enrolled in 2016 and 2017. Mr. Speaker, the Akufo government in 2005-2006 academic year rolled out the Ghana School Feeding Program to provide at least one meal to school children in deprived communities between 2016 and now. The feeding program, Mr. Speaker, has been extended to reach 2,980,000 pupils in deprived communities, representing, Mr. Speaker, an increase of 78.3% in beneficiaries. In providing equal opportunity for foundational education through school feeding, we have invested 1.3 billion since 2017 as compared to 925 million in the 3 years prior to 2017. Mr. Speaker, compassion for our compatriots has seen us expand LEAP to reach 334,000 households by June 2020, representing an increase of 56.8% in beneficiaries since 2016. Furthermore, government through LEAP has also successfully enrolled 73% of its beneficiaries onto the NHS for free. We have invested 464 million since 2017 to increase access to services and opportunities among the extremely poor and vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, the restoration of allowance for trainees has brought relief valued at 994 million to 50,825 and 48,000 nurses and teacher trainees, respectively, between 2017 and December 2020. An additional 57 million have been released for 48,200 nurses trainees at the end of June 2020. This is true relief, Mr. Speaker, for students and guardians while advancing our efforts to build a robust health and educational system. Mr. Speaker, to support our youth, 97,373 graduates have been employed in key sectors of the economy under NAPCO program since May 2018. We have subsequently retained them by spending over 1.6 billion, and that is money in their respective pocket, but more importantly, the build-up of dignity and training for future jobs. Mr. Speaker, the government's Planting for Food and Jobs initiative has saved 1.9 million Ghanaian farmers in excess of Ghana cedis 1.8 billion over the last 3.5 years through subsidized fertilizers and other inputs. This is money in their pockets. The increasage of improved seeds and fertilizer by farmers has led to improved productivity of selected food crops. Mr. Speaker, a major outcome of our intervention in the agricultural sector has been the dramatic improvement in food security, leading to increased exports of food items to neighboring countries from 85,000 metric tons to 133,145 metric tons between 2017 and 2019. Towards enhancing the export potential of the country, approximately 15 million seedlings of cashew, coffee, coconut, and oil palm have been distributed to farmers. This Parliament has already passed a tree crop development bill to properly regulate the development of these crops. Mr. Speaker, government's agenda for industrial development, for job creation and economic transformation rests on the partnership with the private sector to operationalize the One District, One Factory initiative. Our push on this front has resulted in 70 operational factories with 232 projects at various stages of implementation. Not only have we leveraged private sector support through tax exemptions valued at 33 million Ghana cedis, government has directly spent 210 million as support to existing factories and for the construction of new factories. Our industrial agenda has certainly enhanced the prospect for more jobs for Ghanaians. We have also eased credit constraints faced by 97,876 small and micro enterprises, mostly in the informal sector, and Maslow with an amount of 99 million Ghana cedis between 2017 and 2010. This intervention continues to help these enterprises to thrive and sustain the employment of fellow Ghanaians, especially women. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President has been an ardent advocate of youth entrepreneurship. Through the Presidential Business Support Program, about 19 startups have been trained and mentored to create about 90,000 direct and indirect jobs. A total amount of 88.3 million has been expended to make this possible. Infrastructure development. As a government, Mr. Speaker, we have been preoccupied with providing connective infrastructure to spur socio-economic development. This has remained a high priority as it is a bedrock agenda to make our country the regional hub for trade, manufacturing, and logistics. Mr. Speaker, in offering a major boost to the road sector, we declared 2020 as a year of roads. Despite the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, substantial progress has been made. Major road infrastructure undertaken by the government includes Tema Motorway Roundabout, a 3-tier interchange which is completed and commissioned, Pokwasi Interchange, and Accra Urban Transport Project. This involves the construction, Mr. Speaker, of a 4-tier interchange. Progress currently stands at 74%. Obecha Lantern Circle Interchange and ancillary works currently at 45% completion. Tamale Interchange Project, which is 40% complete. Kumasi Lake Roads and Drain Extension Project are 55% completion at the end of June 2020. Mr. Speaker, residents of all urban centers, especially Accra, Ho, Kumasi, and Takoradi, are seeing continual improvements in inner city roads in their metropolis. In addition, construction of critical inter-regional road projects and bridges, including the Eastern Corridor Phase 1, are all at various stages of completion. Road contractors have seen increased payment of claims by government. We have paid road contractors approximately 64 billion from 2017 to date. That substantially helps them to meet their obligations and sustain their operations. Mr. Speaker, we set out to modernize the railway system and effectively replace the colonial rail layout. Mr. Speaker, Since 2017, we have committed 566 billion to cover works on construction and rehabilitation of railway lines, including rehabilitation of Accra to Tem, 30 kilometers, Achimota to Nsawam, 33 kilometers, Kojo Krom to Takwa, 56 kilometers. The Tema to Pakadan railway line has seen approximately 56 kilometers out of the 97 kilometers of track lane works. The construction of the new standard gauge Western Line, Takoradi to Kumasi, or the Kojo Krom to Mansu section is also on course. Mr. Speaker, as the rail minister would say, the fundamentals are strong. Mr. Speaker, to activate these networks, a contract for the purchase of 35 trains has also been signed. A set of 9 trains will be delivered within 18 months. Mr. Speaker, sustainable delivery of basic infrastructure to improve lives in rural and peri-urban communities has engaged our attention. The implementation of the Infrastructure for Poverty Eradication Program initiative is premised on this interest. Mr. Speaker, under the IPEP program, the infrastructure deficit in these communities have been significantly closed. A number of infrastructure initiatives, including prefabricated warehouses, one village, one dam, constituency, one ambulance, mechanized boreholes have been implemented in all 275 constituencies. Our commitment to Ghanaians in these areas have meant that we invested 524 million from 2017 to date. Mr. Speaker, we commenced the construction of 10 fish landing sites at Teshi, Axim, Diskov, Elmina, Winneba, Mountford, Senreku, Fetegoma, Mori, and Keta to improve safety and enhance the quality of life in fishing communities. We've improved access roads and refrigeration, market linkages were strengthened, and losses will be minimized. 8 of fish landing sites are already at various stages of completion. Mr. Speaker, government has also invested about 904 million in the provision of sanitation facilities and potable water, mostly to deprived communities. These have supported the fitting of hand pumps to deliver water to about 220,000 households. In addition, a total of 7,240-litre waste bins have been deployed in selected MMDAs within the Greater Accra, Ashanti, Western Central, OT, and Eastern regions, as well as state institutions, to aid in the proper disposal of waste. Mr. Speaker, the sense of deprivation and exclusion experienced by residents in inner city and Zongo communities has been of concern to President Akufo-Addo. Not only have we established the Ministry of Inner City and Zongo Development to drive improvements in these communities, we have funded earmark projects by resourcing the Zongo Development Fund instituted by this government. We have committed 87 million to ZDF to support the delivery of key projects in education and skills training, health and sanitation, sports and leisure, local businesses and sectors of culture, as well as improved security. With the investments, the inequality gap is being bridged to enhance social mobility. In response to government's introduction of a new comprehensive automotive manufacturing development policy, some of the leading global automobile industries, referred to as original equipment manufacturers, have already established commercial interests in Ghana to assemble their brand of vehicles. In March 2020, the Volkswagen Group rolled out the first VW locally assembled vehicle. VW Ghana is currently producing 6 different brands of vehicles, namely the Tiguan, the Terramon, the Amarok, Passat, Polo, and Caddy. Both the Toyota and Nissan groups are also positioned to establish assembly operations before the end of the year. Sinotruk, a leading global manufacturer of heavy-duty trucks, is also assembling a variety of trucks in Ghana through Zonda Tech Ghana Limited. An indigenous Ghanaian company, Mr. Speaker, the Kantanka Group, which I drive one, has also been formally granted a license to continue their auto assembly operations in Ghana and to benefit from incentives under the Ghana Automotive Manufacturing Policy. Mr. Speaker, I can vouch for the integrity of the vehicle and will encourage my friends across the aisle to invest in that company. In order to support these new major developments, government will establish an automobile industry development center, which will, among other things, coordinate technical processes for licensing vehicle assemblers and manufacturers and monitor their compliance of industry's regulations and standards. The center will also coordinate the implementation of a vehicle financing scheme, which will link financial institutions to individuals and groups interested in purchasing newly assembled vehicles in Ghana. Furthermore, it will manage an automobile skills and technology upgrading program to provide requisite skills for the industry. It is envisaged that the development of the automobile industry in Ghana, which is one of the new strategic anchor initiatives being promoted by the Ministry of Trade and Industry's Industrial Transformation Agenda, will constitute a significant step, Mr. Speaker, towards import substitution and enhancing exports, particularly within the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Ghana is well positioned, Mr. Speaker, to become the new automobile manufacturing hub in Africa. Mr. Speaker, the continued and successful implementation of these interventions is delivering real relief to our people. Effectively, we are gradually building a stronger foundation for a more inclusive transformation of our country. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 impact and mitigating measures. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will now proceed to present the impact of COVID-19 and the mitigating measures adopted by government. Mr. Speaker, 2020 has been a very challenging year for the global economy, primarily as a result of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic, Mr. Speaker, has disrupted global economic activity, created uncertainty, and weakened global growth conditions. Growth for 2020, which was projected at 0.4%, is now expected to contract by 4.9% in 2020. Advanced countries are expected to contract by 8%. Emerging markets, developing economies projected to contract 3 percentage points, while Sub-Saharan Africa is expected to contract by 3.2%. Mr. Speaker, Germany's leader, the bastion of fiscal prudence, Chancellor Merkel, stated that don't talk to me about budget deficits in this era. The IMF predicts in its June 2020 World Economic Outlook the global overall fiscal balance will worsen from a deficit of 3.9% of GDP in 2019 to a deficit of 13.9% in 2020, as global debt to GDP ratios will worsen from 80.8% of GDP in 2019 to 101.5% of GDP in 2020. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, global trade is expected to contract by 11.9% in 2020, with that of emerging market and developing economies declining by 9.4% of GDP. Many governments have cut interest rates and provided fair stimulus to businesses and industry, as well as social safety nets to their citizens. Governments have rolled out billions, sometimes trillions of dollars to boost their economies, hoping to dampen economic damage brought on by the pandemic. Massive economic support have been pledged, from direct payments to individuals to limitless loans for distressed businesses. It is estimated that the G20 countries are providing over 11 trillion in fiscal support, about 3.5 trillion of which will support direct government spending. Multilateral institutions, particularly the IMF and the World Bank, have also announced specific support packages for member countries. IMF has within the last 4 months approved an amount of $10 billion for African countries compared to $1 billion each year in the past 3 years. Mr. Speaker, these global developments and projections have significant implications for the socio-economic life here in Ghana. Mr. Speaker, government was swift and active in its response to the pandemic. With the commendable support of this august House, the imposition of restrictions under 2020 Act 1012 was enacted to enforce social and physical distancing protocols. Under Act 1012, Mr. Speaker, government imposed restrictions on movement of persons in the Greater Metropolitan Area and Kumasi Metropolitan Area and contiguous districts for a period of 3 weeks. Mr. Speaker, just as the Ghanaian economy was beginning to consolidate its recent gains for growth and jobs, the COVID-19 outbreak hit the country, leading to the initial severe movement of restrictions. Although the restrictions are gradually being eased, the pandemic continues to pose significant challenges to the Ghanaian economy. The sectors heavily affected include hotel and hospitality industry, foreign direct investment, trade and industry, agriculture, health, transportation, manufacturing, services, education, households and business have equally been hard hit with significant job loss and reduced incomes. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has led to disruptions in corporate and general business confidence with threats to projected revenues, profitability, liquidity growth. So far, 9 of the 28 state-owned enterprises are projecting losses up to $1.6 billion for 2020. Mr. Speaker, restrictions on movement and enforcement of social distancing protocols severely affected the transit sector. Commuter minibus services, trotros, operated at 70% load capacity, whilst inner city buses had passengers reduced by 50% between March and May. The operations of Metro Mass Transport experienced a decline in monthly revenues from 5.5 million to 2.1 million cedis. The Intercity STT company witnessed a decline in bus services and luggage revenue from average of 5 million in previous months to average of 3 million cedis since March 2020. Driver and Vehicle Licensing Authority also experienced loss as revenues fell drastically from 3.5 million to about 1 million between March and April 2020. Evidence presented by the tour operators shows 11,558 tourists canceled their visits to Ghana, leading to a projected year-to-year revenue loss of 4.8 million Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, in the energy sector, the significant impact on exploration, appraisal, and production of oil and gas activities, including delays in implementing the 20 work programs of operators. The Petroleum Commission has estimated that projects valued at $324 million across the petroleum upstream subsector have stalled or been postponed due to the pandemic. Alka Energy, for instance, has notified the Ministry of Energy of the postponement of the Peckham field development. This has impacted the delivery of first oil from the Peckham project, thereby postponing projected revenues to the government. These postponements could weaken the critical role of the oil and gas sector in propelling economic growth. Mr. Speaker, to authenticate initial indications, the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations is currently leading a comprehensive study on job losses, as well as the impact of COVID-19 on employment and related matters in Ghana. This august House will accordingly be apprised in due course. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, the projected real GDP growth for 2020 has been revised considerably downwards from 6.8% to 0.9%. Mr. Speaker, it is only a solid foundation established by this government and the resilient base built by the Bank of Ghana that has saved the economy from contracting, as has happened in many countries. Mr. Speaker, the fuel cost of COVID-19 pandemic is enormous. When I appeared before this August House in March this year, I informed honorable members that the total fuel impact of the pandemic was estimated about 9.4 billion, 2.5% revised GDP, stemming from falls in petroleum receipts, import duties, and other tax revenues, the cost of the Emergency Preparedness Response Plan, and cost of the Coronavirus Alleviation Program. Mr. Speaker, updated fiscal estimates indicate revenues are expected to fall short of the 2020 budget target by 13.6 billion cedis, 3.5% of revised GDP, arising from shortfalls in petrol receipts of 5.3 billion Ghana cedis, non-oil tax revenue of 5.1 billion Ghana cedis, and non-tax revenues of 3.3 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, expenditures, on the other hand, are expected to increase by 13.1 billion Ghana cedis, 3.4% of revised GDP, reflecting mainly expenditures on COVID-19 preparedness and response plan, provision of infrastructure, coronavirus alleviation program, capitalization of National Development Bank, security, elections, and payment of outstanding claims. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the year, government did not anticipate the need to provide over 300,000 COVID-19 test kits, extra allowance to frontline health workers, income tax exemptions for all health sector workers, hire over 1,000 contact tracers, supply households with water, free electricity for over 50% of the population, and provide 600 million to support small and medium enterprises under the Coronavirus Alleviation Program. Mr. Speaker, all these costs to government come at a time of reduced revenue at our ports, falling global oil prices, near collapse of the hospitality industry, and a general decline in global trade. Unexpected expenditure often leads to increased budget deficit. However, it should be noted that these are not ordinary times, and as such, we require extraordinary economic and financial interventions. Mr. Speaker, the interventions implemented by countries world over have been massively expensive but necessary to sustain the economies amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. It is worthy of note that most of these interventions by various countries were not budgeted for at the beginning of the fiscal year. And these countries, like Ghana, could experience the deficits not because of profligate spending or mismanagement of the economies, but the inescapable emergencies of these times. Indeed, our donor partners are amazed at how we have spent so little and yet achieved such impressive results compared to the colossal resources their governments have released to support their economies. Mr. Speaker, government proactively put together the 560 million National Emergency Preparedness Response Plan for COVID-19 to help manage and contain the spread of the virus and strengthen the national capacity for service, diagnosis, and case management. The implementation of the plan was anchored on the 3 T's of testing, tracing, and treatment. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance our testing efforts, the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research at Legon at the University of Ghana, the Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research, KCCR, and the National Public Health Reference Laboratory, Kolebu, were designated as national testing institutions. The capacity of scientific research and testing teams at the 3 original designated testing institutions have been significantly expanded to 10 over the last 4 to 6 weeks. Mr. Speaker, supply of such needed logistics was also a first order priority. Accordingly, government provided $3.6 million reusable face masks, 50,000 medical scraps, 90,000 hospital gowns, and 90,000 headgears to the health facilities from 9th of April to 30th of June 2020, and these were manufactured locally. Mr. Speaker, in motivating health personnel, government has provided a life insurance package worth 10 million Ghana cedis for those directly involved in surveillance, case management, laboratory, and all other health and allied personnel who get affected. Additional provision was made for overtime and rebate payments for key frontline workers. Transport costs and costs for sustenance for contact tracers, and field surveillance officers were also absorbed by government. Mr. Speaker, to further cushion and incentivize frontline workers, government waived personal income taxes for 137,000 health workers, offered allowance of 50% of basic salary for about 10,000 frontline health workers, and provided them transportation for the duration of the lockdown. These direct reliefs to health workers cost government additional 320 million Ghana cedis. To mitigate the impact of the pandemic on citizens, government needed to help businesses retain workers and support families in these unprecedented times, with Ghanaians being asked to stay home or work from home if possible, and observe hygiene protocols. Government substantially covered the cost of electricity and water services from April to June 2020. To this end, electricity and water consumption was temporarily subsidized. Government fully covered the cost of consumption of the 1 million lifeline customers and subsidized 50% of the consumption of all other customers. This livelihood preservation program for about 4 million households and 680,000 businesses added an unplanned 1.02 billion to government expenditures. The total cost of the water relief program to government is projected at 275.5 million, out of which 199 million has been paid by end of June 2020. Mr. Speaker, government through the Gender Ministry and NADMO provided 1,827,581 and 917,142 cooked food packages to vulnerable persons within Accra and Kumasi, respectively, during the lockdown. In collaboration with faith-based organizations, government also distributed dry food packages to about 470,000 families. Let me extend my deepest gratitude to the faith-based organizations for this unique partnership with governments, and may the Lord count this as righteousness for the faith-based organizations and the government. Mr. Speaker, it's also households, in terms of supply of dry food packs or cooked meals, cost government 54 million to enable them to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. This was in addition to an amount of 50 million transferred to the 400,000 most vulnerable individuals under the LEAP program. Mr. Speaker, in response to the flight of an estimated 8,212 Ghanaians stranded abroad due to disruptions caused by the pandemic, government has rolled out Operations Return Home program. As at end June 2020, a total of 2,250 individuals have been evacuated, with government bearing the cost of flight and mandatory 14-day hotel quarantine services for 1,116 persons, most of whom are students. Government has prioritized the easing of restrictions on education by first allowing final year students at the tertiary level to resume schooling on Monday, 15 June 2020. To facilitate this process, a total, Mr. Speaker, of 600,000 faces were supplied to the tertiary institutions. In addition to this, 1,700 Veronica baskets, 200 buckets, 200,000 liters of alcohol-based sanitizers, 3,400 liters of liquid soap, 900 thermometer guns were also distributed. All the 1,167 senior high schools in the country were fumigated and disinfected. Government also provided 2.4 million pieces of reusable face masks to students, teachers, and non-teaching staff, invigilators, and school administrators, with each person receiving 3 pieces. The economy. Mr. Speaker, recognizing the devastating impact of the pandemic on businesses and in the spirit of the Ghana Be Aid vision, government mobilized several local industries to produce and ensure adequate supply of critically needed inputs to fight the pandemic. As part of the program, government procured PPEs consisting of 50,000 hospital scrubs costing 6 million cedis, as well as 90,000 medical gowns and caps valued at 6.7 million were produced by the local textile firms. In addition, 15 million face masks, out of which 5 million and 10 million supplied to frontline health workers and schools respectively at the cost of 65 million Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, the CAP Business Support Scheme of 600 million cedis was designed to specifically support micro, small and medium-sized enterprises and was launched by His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo on 19th May 2020. The scheme is part of the 1.2 billion cap approved by Parliament to address the disruptions to economic activities to the pandemic. To date, more than 64,000 Ghanaians from all the regions have benefited from the scheme. The scheme established the Adom Microsoft loans to micro enterprises, which are being disbursed through the Vodafone mobile money platform. Then the soft loans targeted at small and medium enterprises will be dispersed through participation in financial institutions. Mr. Speaker, through the scheme, tin registration in Ghana increased approximately 110,000 a month to 850,449 from 9th May 2020 to 30th June 2020. Thereby supporting government's agenda to formalize the informal sector. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the interventions, government through the Bank of Ghana responded to the COVID-19 related challenges in the banking sector with a suite of policy measures designed to cushion business and the economy at large. We targeted syndicated lending of 3 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to announce that the banks have reported loan restructurings, moratoria, and new facilities of over 7 billion cedis in the past 4 months. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 National Trust Fund established under Act 1013 in April 2020 had mobilized about 53 million from individuals, churches, corporate bodies, staff of organizations, non-government organizations, groups, and associations, among others, as at the end of June 2020, including, Mr. Speaker, this August House. Out of an amount of 32 million have been used for the same period. Mr. Speaker, the scale of this pandemic has deepened the strategic partnership between the state and non-state actors, especially the private sector. Mr. Speaker, the Church of Pentecost, as a humanitarian gesture and in keep of recent social partnership arrangements, offered the Pentecost Convention Center at Gomoafete as an isolation sector for infected persons. Similarly, the Catholic Church released a post office facility located across the country to house and treat infected persons. The 140-bed capacity Ghana Man Soccer Center in Pram Pram, owned the Ghana Football Association, also served as an isolation center. The work of the traditional churches, charismatic, Pentecostal churches, and our Islamic leaders continue to uphold our people. To help mobilize critical support from the business community and help government respond promptly to the pandemic, the private sector set up the Ghana COVID-19 Private Sector Fund to provide critical interventions to Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, in a commendable effort towards increasing the country's infectious disease treatment capacity, private sector fund has undertaken to construct 400-bed facilities, each with a 21 intensive care unit, a level 2.5 laboratory and staff block in Accra, Kumasi, Tamale, and Takoradi. First of these 4, which commenced through a virtual sword cutting by His Excellency the President on 17th April 2020, is expected to be commissioned by end August 2020. This is real partnership at work. Mr. Speaker, at the very height of the pandemic, overnight, planes stopped flying, buses were empty, city centers were deserted, churches were closed, offices empty, and hotels shut down. The experience of this pandemic has come along with real lessons that have implications for Ghana's socio-economic development. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has taught us that a lot of the things we did not believe possible are possible. The Tyson emergency social support and economic stimulus packages announced by G20 and OECD countries must ignite our passions for our country and re-energize our efforts to create prosperity for all our people. Speaker, I believe we must not waste this pandemic. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really effect and deliver an enduring transformational change. We are called upon to remove the unspoken limits on our ambitions and critically examine all the boundaries we imposed on ourselves. Mr. Speaker, we must have courage and be audacious in repositioning Ghana and Ghanaians, not only to mitigate this pandemic, but to implement programs that will transform our country. We should change our approach to our development and to do the impossible. Under the leadership of President Akufo-Addo and informed by broad consultations, we have prepared the Ghana COVID-19 Alleviation and Revitalization of Enterprises Support, the Ghana Cares Obatampa program for this very purpose. Mr. Speaker, the Ghana Cares Obatampa program is an unprecedented, bold, and audacious 100 billion program for us to reimagine and re-envision our future like never before. It is sequenced into Mr. Speaker, a stabilization phase that runs from July to the end of the year 2020, and a medium-term revitalization phase will accelerate the Ghana Beyond Aid transformation agenda. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I wish to highlight the main elements of each phase of the program. Mr. Speaker, the stabilization phase of the Ghana Cares Obatampa program would ensure food security, protect businesses and worker incomes, strengthen the health system, and attract private investments and support Ghanaian businesses. Mr. Speaker, government will intensify support for farmers through the Plan for Food and Jobs and Rain for Food and Jobs program. Will aggressively facilitate access to financing the rice millers, enable them to purchase paddy from rice farmers. In addition, will provide financial support to the National Buffer Stock Company and Ghana Commodity Exchange to enable them stores and trade stocks as needed to smoothing out supplies on the market. Mr. Speaker, government will inject liquidity into a system to ease cash flow difficulties of businesses and protect workers by honoring obligations contracting suppliers in a timely manner. Building on recent good experience of sourcing from the pharmaceutical and textile and gas sectors, government will expand procurement from local producers for its goods and services. Mr. Speaker, we are mindful of the fact that some businesses may have to shed some labor in order to survive. In the unlikely event that this happens, government through the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations is collaborating with social partners, labor and employers to establish a national unemployment insurance scheme. The scheme will provide The scheme will provide temporary income support to workers that are laid off and also provide them access to retraining to help them take advantage of employment opportunities in new fields. Mr. Speaker, government will soon roll out an emergency preparedness and response plan 2, which will enable us to continue strengthening the health system. Mr. Speaker, government will over the course of this year work with this House to pass a number of legislations that will provide a strong framework to raise the funds, attract the investment necessary for the revitalization and transformation phase of the Ghana Yes program, and rationalize and strengthen support to SMEs. This would include bills on tax exemption, public-private partnership, the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, development finance institutions, home ownership financing, and Enterprise Ghana. The Speaker, over the medium term, 2021 to 2023, government's plan is to implement the phase 2 of the Ghana Cares Obatam PAP program, which will revitalize and transform the economy. The main focus will be to accelerate the implementation of the Ghana Beyond Aid agenda. In our economic revitalization and transformation, government will take resolute measures to improve the business environment for the private sector. Specific measures to be implemented include significant foods to the poor and vulnerable persons in Accra and Kumasi the 3-day lockdown. Today, government has paid 5.4 million as full cost cover for WASIA nations for all 313,837 SHS students. This is a caring government. A responsive and caring government is one that with urgency and military precision managed to fund and provide the logistical support to supply 5.2 million reusable face masks, 64,700 Veronica buckets, accompanies sanitizers to all final year students at tertiary, senior, and junior high schools levels in Ghana to return to school and write their examinations. A responsible and caring government is one that sees it as necessary to show support and appreciation to the 137,000 health workers we relieved, valued at 320 million, and provide insurance cover for them. Mr. Speaker, the future is about digitalization. Data is now becoming as essential as water and electricity, especially for our youth and businesses. The COVID-19 pandemic has reaffirmed us, especially as more people work remotely and also access education and health services. This caring government, Mr. Speaker, has worked diligently to digitalize the economy over the last 3.5 years. We need to further speed up the digitalization effort, where every citizen nationwide has access to the internet and other digital services. As such, going forward, government will work with the telcos and the Electricity Company of Ghana to roll out fiber across the country on the of the electricity distribution network, so every citizen nationwide, Mr. Speaker, will have access to speed broadband. In the short term, Mr. Speaker, we'll reduce the communication sales CST from 9% to 5%. We will reduce the CST tax from 9% to 5% to reduce the cost of communication service to the consumer. As more and more people work remotely and utilize online services, we will count on the telcos to match this reduction in the CST by reducing their tariff. This is important for our youth, entrepreneurs, and the burgeoning fintech industry. Mr. Speaker, Ghana has been hit with a double shock: health pandemic and global economic recession. These have resulted in revenue shortfalls of 13.6 billion and unanticipated but necessary expenditures of approximately 11.7 billion. This will result in a projected fiscal deficit, Mr. Speaker, of 11.4% GDP. This is above the 5% limit as stated in the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, Act 982. Mr. Speaker, Ghana is not unique in this regard. The pandemic has caused other countries, including the 20 countries in the EU and Brazil, Jamaica, Costa Rica, etc., to suspend their fiscal rules in 2020 in light of their sharply increased fiscal deficits. Mr. Speaker, given our history, our government history of fiscal rectitude, it is with great difficulty that we are having to suspend our fiscal rule due to exogenous factors. We intend to return to compliance with the FRA in the shortest possible time. Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we do not only survive this pandemic, but recover and thrive, this government is rolling out the 3.5-year Ghana Cares Recovery and Revitalization Program. The Coronavirus Alleviation and Revitalization of Enterprises Support Program, or BATAMPA program, allows us to recreate our economy and set on the course that we yearn for. It will involve an investment, Mr. Speaker, of 100 billion Ghana cedis from 2021 to 2023, of which 30 billion will come from the private sector and 30 billion from the public sector. Mr. Speaker, we consider the CARES program truly groundbreaking as it requires radical reforms in government, particularly in revenue generation, and a radical improvement in doing business for the private sector. It also adopts a whole-of-government implementation approach and fosters closer collaboration with the private sector to give a sustainable future to Ghanaians, as captured earlier. Mr. Speaker, as you can see, every aspect of the lives of Ghanaians will be dramatically impacted with the implementation of this program, ranging from what we eat to where we live to where we work. Mr. Speaker, government will vigorously promote the consumption of locally produced goods, services in order to support local businesses and generate employment. To this end, MDAs and MMDAs will be required, Mr. Speaker, to prioritize the procurement of local goods and services, and our Public Procurement Authority and Central Tender Review Committees shall be so instructed. The aim is to generate local demand and consumption with full force of government's procurement capacity to ensure that most of government procurements will be sourced locally. Mr. Speaker, we are in extraordinary times, which calls for extraordinary leadership. Accordingly, on behalf of the President of the Republic, I have presented to you an extraordinary mid-year fiscal policy review that seeks to reorganize our public finances to protect lives, secure incomes, revitalize businesses, and focus our energies on driving the economy back on track to build a Ghana beyond aid. It involves a recognition that the solutions to Ghana's problems lie with Ghanaians, and that with inspiring leadership, Ghanaians can find a way to address their own challenges. Let me reiterate, Speaker, the President's plan for the next 3.5 years. 1. An unprecedented 100 billion Ghana Cares or BATAMPA program to transform and modernize our economy. 2. For the next 6 months, reduce CST from 9% to 5%. B. Establish a 2 billion guarantee facility to support all sectors of business and job retention to get appropriate loans. C. Establish an unemployment insurance scheme. D. 8. A 100 million CD fund for labor and faith-based organizations for retraining and skills development. Increase the CAP bus program by 150 million CDs to, among others, facilitate credit of 50 million to support the creative arts, the media, and the Conference of Independent Universities. F. Retain provision of free water for next 3 months. Retain free, and finally, Mr. Speaker, retain free electricity for all Lifeline customers for the rest of the year. The agenda of the President is to modernize Ghana for all Ghanaians. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, the agenda of the government is to modernize Ghana for all Ghanaians. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, this leader, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, is only in his first term in office. Mr. Speaker, before I finally conclude, let me pay tribute to all Ghanaians who have endured the difficult and drastic floods from the ravages of this virus, an unknown enemy. Enduring lockdown, social distancing, mandatory wearing of masks, to taking our entrepreneurial spirit in our hands have proven can-do spirit of the Ghanaian. Our endurance is emblematic of the biblical Job who persevered in the hope that God will show him at the right time. Together with James, the brother of Jesus, James chapter 1 verse 4, I will say to them, let endurance complete its work, so that you may be complete and sound in all respects, not lacking, Mr. Speaker, in anything. Mr. Speaker, as often repeated by the President, this too shall pass. I'm confident that with government working closely with this House, we will emerge from this crisis even more united and purposeful. As Ghanaians, I'm confident that with the government working closely with the House, we will emerge from this crisis even more united and purposeful. As Ghanaians, fulfill our manifest destiny as a Black Star of Africa. Mr. Speaker, the Media Fiscal Policy Review and its programs draws us closer to our collective aspirations. While this pandemic requires us to exceed the limits imposed by the FRA Act 982, we have had to make these major expenditures to protect lives and livelihood of Ghanaians and sustain business. We therefore request a supplementary budget of 11,896,577,566 cedis to enable us continue this extraordinary task. Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat, allow me to express sincere gratitude for the enormous support this House has extended me since taking office. I truly appreciate the long hours honorable members of Parliament sat through, considering passing key bills and measures for the Asempa budget in 2017, the Jumapa budget in 2018, the Impromptu budget of 2019, and the Nkoso and Carbon budget of 2020, and now the Obatampa program. Mr. Speaker, the task ahead is great, yet it is a noble and glorious challenge. A challenge, Mr. Speaker, which calls for the courage to dream, the courage to believe, the courage to dare, and the courage to do. The courage to work and the courage to attain excellence in achievement. As a government, we have dared to dream. We have dared to dream, we have dared to believe, to work and achieve. Mr. Speaker, this caring government shall continue, in the words of Job, to be the eyes of the blind, the feet of the lame, and the father of the needy, and champion against injustice for all and traders. Wherever it rears its ugly head, let us as a nation, Mr. Speaker, choose joy and know that He will restore the years that the locust has eaten. Mr. Speaker, the Lord indeed reigns. Clearly we can and will do more with the privilege of service to God and country. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move.
Yes, sir.
Thank you much, Honorable Minister, for attending to the House to move the motion on the mid-year review of the budget statement and economic policy of the Government of Ghana for the 2020 financial year. I trust that the amendment to the Communication Service Tax Law will be brought to the House as soon as possible. You will please table the appropriate document. Honorable members, debate on motions shall stand deferred. The part of the supplementary estimates relating to revenue and expenditure shall stand committed to the Financial Committee in accordance with Press 140 sub 5 and 143. Honorable Majority Leader, any indication, please?
Mr. Speaker, as you said, the Minister has submitted few documents, a mid-year review and supplementary estimates. Speaker, the other one, the supplementary document that also relates to the advancement from the contingency fund. I think all of them have rolled into one, and they've come to us for consideration. The Speaker, as is required of us by Order 143, the debate of this would be stood down until Monday, and when we commence debate on the principles. And then, Speaker, I believe we'll be able to conclude on it on Tuesday or worst case scenario, Wednesday, where perhaps the debate will be limited to the minority itself to conclude. If it is possible to find space, we may conclude Tuesday. But other than that, we'll conclude Wednesday. The Speaker, so we will step down, and the Minister has been on his feet for 2 hours, 50 minutes, and we believe that the issues involved are quite loaded and requires all of us to peruse the document and analyze what he has submitted to us, so that going forward we'll be able to make a determination as to approve the request or not to approve it. The Speaker, it being past 3 o'clock, and indeed our normal sitting ends at 2 o'clock, but it's past 3 o'clock. Adjournment, the Speaker will rest with you. So depending on what the minority that would say, we can take adjournment and come to continue tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the forenoon. Yeah, thank you very much.
Honorable Minority Leader, any response, please?
Yes, with this carrying someone from a desperate and failing government of care. Mr. Speaker, with this carrying someone from a manifestly desperate and failing government
Minority leader. What sermon? I didn't hear the word.
Speaker, the sermon of the finance.
You use an adjective for the sermon.
Caring. Now, Speaker, he learned caring someone.
Caring someone.
Yes, caring. Because his Obatampa care program, Obatampa, not Batamboshe, Obatampa, not Obamboshe. Now, Speaker, he comes to me more with Obatampa, not Obatamboshe. He comes to me more with pledges and promises of a manifesto, the mid-year review of a desperate and failing government. Mr. Speaker, we are in your hands, and I'm guided by truth, and I'm guided by Proverbs 6, verse 16 to 19. Mr. Speaker, with this. Mr. Speaker, we are in your able hands. Having listened to the Minister for Finance, whose promises and